it's a minor point, but point 4, my understanding is that Councillor Handley has also expressed an interest in being involved. So that's a conversation to be had outside of here, but just if that could be noted.
Councillor, I wasn't aware of that, but if the membership agrees to add her, that can be...
Well, it's obviously a conversation to take place outside of here, but just...
We'll have this conversation outside, because Democratic Services do write to everybody and ask them, and so I'll ask her again.
Okay.
Or you can ask her.
I'll leave it with you.
Yeah, thank you. Just for people on the webcast, the objective of the Task and Finish group will be to examine Hertsmere Borough Council's roles and responsibilities regarding the licensing of houses in multiple occupation, including regulation compliance with legislation and policy, and the roles of licensing and planning departments, and also how we can move forward with it. We've already today had our first Task and Finish into communications. It's a really interesting process, and I think we'll be able to add value to our council. So Policy Review has agreed that the members at the moment are Councillor Butler, Clarkson, myself and Councillor Sullivan. Are members happy now to agree for the terms of reference?
Yep.
Yep. Thank you very much. That's great. And we are now going to move to item 8, which is the updated SIL spending process with George and Ola. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thanks. I think I'll just do a very brief summary if you'd like. I think obviously what you got before you tonight is essentially 5 draft papers that are designed to replace the existing sort of various papers that look at the community infrastructure levy spend process. These are designed to essentially provide guidance to applicants when they are applying for SIL funding. You may recall that back in November 2024, we gave a sort of quite a high-level presentation about the direction of travel of these documents, and we sort of set out the key differences between the existing process and the new approach. So tonight, instead of the sort of high-level approach, you've actually got the detailed draft documents, and of course we welcome your comments as well as any recommendations you wish to be considered by the Cabinet. Just very briefly, these documents have been prepared in consultation with the Community Infrastructure Levy Investment Panel, or CILIP. So we discussed the overarching approach to it last summer, and then the sort of first early drafts of the documents back in November 2024, and then these same documents have been circulated to the CILIP as well for comment recently. Just in terms of the overarching aim of these documents, it's just to create essentially a clear and concise process for all applicants, and critically, I think it's probably worth noting that although these documents are key, it's probably part of a wider package of measures which we intend on implementing. That includes things like a sort of comprehensive review of the website and the web text that goes with this. I think we note towards the back end of the covering report as well that we're looking at bringing forward a sort of model NSIL bids, a neighbourhood SIL bid, just to help bidders, particularly those sort of smaller community groups that may not do this very often. The other thing worth noting is I know previously at this committee we had a discussion around what's an NSIL bid, what's a strategic SIL bid, and I think what we were intending on doing is probably providing that information clearly on the web page as well. Although there's some elements in the guidance document, it's not necessarily like a very clear cut-off, but we're probably intending on doing that on the website. And just finally, it's worth noting, I think, in terms of the documents, particularly the bid forms and the scoring criteria, are kind of aimed at just enhancing the transparency in terms of how decision-making is made. Alongside that as well, we've been in contact with Dem Services over the last few months, and the intention is they're going to assist a lot more in SILIP meetings going forward. So there'll be use of modern gov to publish the agenda, as well as the outcome of that as well. So it's, like I say, I think it's a package of measures with these sort of documents sitting in the middle.
Thank you very much, George. Can I ask a question? So when it went to this SILIP committee, if you remind me when that was, and what comments did they make on the original? What changes have been made?
Yeah, so the one where we received comments back and we had the discussion was back in November. I can't remember the exact date of the meeting, but it was November. We then came to this committee after that discussion. So I think I was able to reflect back some of the points of that discussion. Then what we've done, I mean, in terms of the details as to where they've sort of been implemented in the individual draft documents, I think it's probably fair to say they're scattered throughout. Both the comments made by this committee and the SILIP. We circulated the documents to the SILIP panel, must have been a few weeks ago now, a couple of weeks ago. We haven't received any comments, detailed comments back anyway, at the minute.
Thank you. Also, it says under strategic SIL, does the applicant possess the requisite capacity, expertise and resource? But that's not defined. So what happens when they just put yes? What does that question mean? It's an open question. And for something which is a strategic SIL application, which could be for a lot of money, surely there must be a definition somewhere. Is it defined? I couldn't find the definition.
Sorry, can you point me towards where?
Sorry, question number 2 in the strategic SIL document. Question application. So page 144 of our papers.
So,
does your organisation possess the requisite capacity, expertise and resources to successfully deliver this project?
Good evening. I suppose the purpose of that particular question is to get an idea as to the intention in terms of the bid and whether they have internal expertise to, a individual could be wanting to deliver, I don't know, some sort of a building, for example. Do they have contact with planners and the likes and so on and so forth? It's just really understanding what their capabilities are and should they, and again, really just prompting the understanding that should they require more help and so on and so forth, that could be part of the overall process.
Could I just add a bit more? I think we're constantly sort of balancing too much information, people being put off, with having enough information that we can obviously make decent recommendations, and obviously do our due diligence as officers to be able to say, look, this is a good bid to, we recommend this for funding. I think in some cases, obviously, some of these questions are quite open. With particularly the strategic SIL bid, we're obviously trying to set a slightly higher bar. You know, these, in a lot of cases, are people who put together bids quite frequently for infrastructure. So if, for example, it was HCC and they were talking about schools, bringing forward a school, I think they'd obviously be able to just, in this case, make a very clear demonstration of all of the previous pieces of infrastructure they brought forward that relate to it. I think obviously if it was a slightly smaller group that were bringing it forward, again, there'd probably be there's a bit of a sliding scale in terms of what we'd expect. But again, I think it's just trying to tease out as much information as possible. Compared to perhaps previously, we were just having to fill in a few too many gaps before making a recommendation. And I think, or having to go back to the bidders a couple of times just to sort of tease out that additional information. So we can perhaps look at the wording if that's not...
Because if the answer is no, does that mean the bid is turned down? And if the answer is, if there's a chance we can offer them help, or can they go to help? How? I just need to know that's going to be signposted, because they're making the bids, which means they've got a project. But if the answer no, what's the implications of that? I'm presuming.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we've tried to do with this, these forms, is obviously provide those, you can see in the sort of lighter text, it's almost guidance, which I think was one of the real issues we had in the previous forms, where we were asking the same question, but getting 3 completely different answers from 3 submissions. So hopefully this time it can deliver slightly more comparable bids, albeit obviously in this case it's noted that there isn't grey text guiding it. So I think perhaps we can just look at how that's worded.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, George, and thanks to you and the team for all the hard work you put into these documents. There's a lot there and lots of really good things. One point I make is similar to Councillor Cohen's, which is about definition. And it's something that has come up in these conversations before, and at the risk of seeming pedantic, I still don't think we've quite cracked, which I think sort of round about page 134, section 1.5-ish, you just need a couple of paragraphs just to explain what the difference is in layman's terms. And in a way, this document reads really well if you already understand what SIL is. And what we don't want to have is these documents keep bouncing around between different committees for the rest of our lives. So I'm not suggesting you bring it back to us, but I would strongly recommend there is just something in very layman's terms really early on that just says strategic is big picture stuff benefiting the whole borough. Neighbourhood is smaller local things for minor and simpler projects. And the reason that is sort of front of mind for me, because obviously I represent a Bushy ward where neighbourhood SIL is relevant, and in trying to explain it, I've gone to a number of community groups to say this is available, have a think about it, and they're not understanding. I know this isn't out in the public domain yet, but they even sort of head teachers are finding it difficult to understand what it is and the distinction. So ultimately, my recommendation would be there's something in really simple layman's terms very early on that makes sense to someone who's never thought about any of this issue before.
Yeah, I think we've discussed this quite a bit as a team, how to bring that forward. Again, there's a few things we've got to consider just with a very clear cut-off. That said, I think we could go further to make it just a bit more obvious what is one and what is another. The only thing I will bring up just in terms of NSIL, and I'm going to also just double check my colleague agrees with me here, is because obviously we only got 2 areas where we would manage the NSIL, and obviously neighbourhood SIL's dealt with by the parish and town councils elsewhere. They've obviously got their own sort of elements that they would fund through that, and they're sort of different categories, if you will. We just didn't want to very strictly say it's X amount and it's got to be this, because if you go to Borehamwood it might be slightly different, and if you went to Aldenham, for example. That said, can we give more guidance? I think we probably can.
I think all you need is an overview. So like maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs at the front as an overview, just explaining an introduction to the main things. This exists, this is what it's for, and this is how you can potentially access these funds. I'm not suggesting you rework the whole thing. I think it's just an overview in very layman's terms to explain to a group who might never have considered any part of this process before.
And can I ask a question then about the expectation, especially for the SIL bids, to go to the parish and town councils that already had SIL money? Is there an expectation now, or is that being removed?
Sorry.
For joint funding, we used to have that on the officers' checklist, that there was a joint, that they would also go for local bids.
So they could essentially dip into 2 pots.
Yeah. Or to get it to ask that they've gone to the first pot first, which should be the first port of call.
Yeah, I don't. This process definitely doesn't preclude that happening. Whether we need to make specific reference to it, I think we could probably take that away and have a look. We obviously refer to other funding streams being sought, and that ultimately helping a bid through the process. The other thing we were intending on doing with the website is obviously just making it much clearer. If you are in Aldenham and you're looking for a neighbour bid, where do you go? What part of the website, etc. So I think perhaps we could either wrap it up into that or maybe be just a little bit clearer in the guidance bid. So yeah, we can take that away.
It's still unclear, if you don't mind me saying. So then have we changed our view that we're going to be offering 100% of certain bids now? Have we changed the direction we're going? Because before it was that local communities should be expected to show support by putting some of money in, raising money beforehand. That shows the buy-in of communities. I can't see that. I can see a question, what funding, if any, does this project have? But then I can't see when it goes into the officer's criteria, any link to that for scoring. And that used to be there. Is that a deliberate policy change?
That has changed. I think we discussed that at CILIP or with CILIP members. I'm not saying it's necessarily unanimous, but I think the sort of general process was looking at not including, saying you need definitive match funding, you need X amount. It was trying to encourage basically all bids to come forward. I think as officers we were sort of trying to encourage a degree of funding to come forward, because I think and we discussed it actually at the CILIP panel as well, that those bids that do come forward with a degree of their own funding, it just shows that they are taking that first step themselves.
Okay. Councillor Rani.
How will the updated process make it easier for community groups to apply and for benefit for the SIL funding? Like, how are we going to help the local resident and community to apply and give them the guidance?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we're hoping the purpose of these documents can achieve. Again, I think it is about that holistic package of measures, though. If we put these documents up but didn't amend the website, I don't think it would necessarily help. I think we've got to make sure we do everything. I think also it's just making it, we refer a lot to sort of IFSs and IDPs, infrastructure funding statements, infrastructure delivery plans, actually explain to the community what they are, why are they relevant. I think that's important as well. So yeah, I think the other thing as well is just making it very clear there's two separate routes. I think obviously with the comments tonight we've heard that we probably need to be clearer about when and which route you need to be going down. But yeah, I think it's the whole sort of reasoning behind this this change or these proposed amendments are to try and assist ultimately communities coming forward.
So Councillor Butler first, then Councillor Sussman.
Sorry, just got there. No problem, thanks. Just a comment and maybe a kind of question. So if I do the monitoring, I see that it's going to come to operations review to be monitored, the money's being spent and stuff like that. But it would be good also for the website to always have a clear side, like, this is how much SIL money has been spent within the Borehamwood area, Potters Bar area, stuff like that. These are the projects it's been spent on, so that the public, when they're going on here, they can go, oh, actually, if I go for that, I can understand now that I've got a chance of getting that SIL allocation because it's been done before, So there's a bit of history build up, and it would be good for the council to also promote that actually we're putting in infrastructure. I'm going to be a bit different to my colleagues here, though, when it comes to the 100% bid, rather than having to try and match fund it. Ultimately, we don't know what's going to happen with devolution. We don't know what the future is of SIL. Everything's up in the air. I don't want to see this money just drifted away to another authority and then spent in other parts of Hertfordshire where actually it's the residents of Hertsmere that have suffered the developments that have impacted on their communities and actually should benefit solely from that. And if they've got a chance to get that at the moment, I'm going to put that into the thing. I think actually at the moment I'm probably more inclined to say actually bring those SIL bids forward. Let's get the infrastructure that they rightly deserve because they've had to had the impact of those developments. So actually I'm probably in favour of that at the moment until we know what the future is of devolution and how that'll impact S106 SIL money and whatever the new name is, an acronym that the government's throw at us. So there you go. Thanks.
Yeah, I think just coming back on the first point, I think, and this is why I sort of refer to the package of measures, and sorry for constantly banging on about it, but the website at the minute, we go to operations review committee and we publish those details. but unless you know where to look, you probably don't see them. Likewise, the infrastructure funding statement also sets out spend as well. I think just getting our web pages right to explain that to people is probably the first part of all of that, and then the continued transparency after that as well. So agree.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, that was really pertinent that Councillor Butler asked his question first, because you brought up a point in your response that I think, following on as well from Councillor Allen and his comment and Councillor Cohen, I think we want residents to be able to benefit from this, especially over the next 2 years. And I think you almost need, because residents don't know that this is there or what they can do, so you almost need, for those who would go to your website, like a flashing star or something on it that says, this is how you can help your community. And from there, I think that, because there are 2 possible routes, almost you need a sort of flow chart so someone takes that right first step. So it's, are you doing this for this? And then in which case you do that. And you just need a few steps to guide people. Because I think your forms generally are good, and I like the sort of faded writing that has the sort of help and guidance. I just think it's getting people to make that first step and actually know that that's a step that they can take, and sort of promoting that and selling that, especially over the next 2 years, because otherwise we'll just be funding other councils' losses. So that's just a comment, so I wonder what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Some further points. Like I say, I don't think you should be bringing these forms back and forth again. It might just be worth, just following on from earlier comments about the forms, maybe including some examples of successful bids. So, 2 or 3 case studies. Potters Bar Town FC, quite a good example. Breakspear School. King George's, that's an internal one. Or the Bushy Scouts, for example. I mean, just some concrete case studies of things which have made the cut and been approved. Potentially maybe also add, for advice or liaison, maybe approach the ward councillor. You might be able to have a conversation. I know something that might not be, officers might not have capacity for that. On the bigger picture, obviously I sit on CILIP, as you know, George, and I think there's good progress. I think good projects have come to us and been successful. And I think the ones we have declined, we've been right to do that because they haven't quite put together a convincing bid and ticked enough of the boxes. And I think in reference to what Councillor Cohen was saying about 100% funding, my experience of CILIP so far is it's been quite case by case in the right way. And I know we're not here to scrutinise CILIP in this conversation, but it is an adjunct. And I think I would be fairly confident that CILIP is making the right sort of decisions. And of course, they do then get referred to full council over a certain threshold. One point I'd like to raise, which isn't really, it is a bit tangential to this conversation about the paperwork, but as you'll hear, I would like to kind of mention, because in the mythology around it, one of the first examples of an infrastructure project is roads. And the first example of an outside agency who could get involved in SIL is Hertfordshire County Council. And just as an example, I don't get bogged down in bushy issues, but as an example, I have been working on trying to get a zebra crossing outside a school. So I said to everybody, why don't we apply for NSIL? Not SSIL, but NSIL, which there is adequate reserves. And I went to offices here and via a county council offices at Hertfordshire, and they both said, oh, you can't use SIL for that, do something else. So, but it says in here that's what you can do. So I'm not expecting you to answer that question here and now, but I think it'd be really good to go away and have a think about it. Because it says here, apply for roads, Hertfordshire can do it, Hertfordshire don't seem to know about it, or they don't like it, or something is disconnected there. Meanwhile, no zebra crossing, and still almost every penny of Bushy's neighbourhood SIL money is still sitting there in the bank after 2 years after I became a councillor. So something isn't working there.
Yeah, I don't know much about that specific example, so I probably won't comment on that. But noted.
No, I mean, I wasn't expecting to. I was kind of using it as an indicator.
But noted about the point about bids on the website.
Members, any further questions or comments?
Yes. So how will the council make sure the money is spent on the projects that really benefit the local area, local residents? How council will make sure?
Well, there's a number of mechanisms in terms of how councillors and the council are obviously checking in on CIL spend. So I mentioned about operations review committee, so we're obliged to take a report every year on that. Likewise, the infrastructure funding statement as well, so these are public documents. Also, it's worth noting that as soon as CIL spend goes over £100,000, it has to go to full council for agreement as well. I think also a lot of the bigger projects obviously need things like planning permission. So there's also a number of sort of hooks to go back and check they've been implemented correctly. I think also the most simple form of how we sure that things are being delivered correctly, we don't pay until we're obviously assured that the projects are going forward as described. So yeah, there's a number of mechanisms both within the sort of council processes and just the team processes as well.
But I also think Councillor Ron has made a good point. Some of the applications that we've approved state that they've got to increase and improve community usage and community benefits. So how do we then retrospectively how do we monitor that?
Yeah, so I know obviously in recent examples, in some cases, maybe not all of them, there has been a sort of planning mechanism associated with it. So actually, in a way, you can defer, and by defer, I don't mean just leave it and assume it's okay, but we can defer to a sort of a planning mechanism like a community use agreement and things like that. I think obviously in other cases, it is about monitoring it. You know, it is about the CIL team directly monitoring what is going on, and that may be as simple as site visits. It may be having to look at websites, usage, things like that, if we're talking about community use.
Sorry, I understand that during the process, but after, when they've had all the monies, for example, a football club, and we expect them to open it to women's football or more diverse football or extra stuff, extra community usage, a year on, 2 years on, how is that monitored?
Yeah, so I think that is that latter point. Whether we have any specific guidance on that, I'm not so sure. So I don't think it's a case of, we will go out on, year 5, year 10, etc. They are more ad hoc. But I think it would be as simple as site visits and just exploring and investigating. Of course, it's probably fair to say that members of the public are probably the best people for reporting any sort of misuse on that. Whilst I don't think we'd want to rely on that, we'd want to have good.
They are with planning because they wouldn't know about the details of a CIL bid. So can I maybe suggest that when we do ask for, as part of the bids, which I know we have done, that they have to increase, that we expect a report either 6 months or every year from the actual people the community groups who have received the bids on how they've fulfilled their obligations, because I don't think there's any other way of you monitoring.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to say that's after completion.
As part of the forms, we do say to them, how are you going to increase, how is this going to better the area, how is this going to better our community? But I don't think we ever follow up on it. I know we don't, and we need to, because that's why we're giving them the money. We're actually giving them money to increase community usage, but we don't follow up on that. Well, on those points, which I can see you writing, so hopefully we've given you some suggestions. Are members happy? I think we're noting this report, aren't we? Thank you very much, yes. And thank you very much, George and Ola, for your presentation. We have a slight problem now, members, in the fact that we can't carry on because we are missing essential elements and people. I know that Cabinet is about to finish. I've been told it will be in the next 5 to 10 minutes. So can I suggest we have a 5-minute break? And we will look into why this has happened, and I will be speaking to Alex, or we will bring it up at the end to ensure this does not happen again.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, actually, I was just thinking because of our members being elsewhere and key personnel, when we do come to the section looking at what we're scrutinising moving forward, who would be the Cabinet member looking after calendar? Because it has continual issues, and I think this is a great example of one of them, and we do really need to see it, to sort of sort it out and look at it moving forward.
It's a good point. I think that's democratic services. Yeah. So I suggest we take a break for 5 minutes till the members who we need are here. Thank you.
and for the huge amount of effort she's put into this review of the allocation system. So, on to. So this is what I'm going to cover, the allocation policy, feedback from the consultation, and then throw it open for your questions. Now, there's a number of slides. Oh, hold it. No, I'll say that in a minute. So the allocation policy, as you know from last time, was last big review is in August 22. And these are the areas you can see which we're covering in that review. If we move to the next slide, and there's kind of a series of slides here which talk about what we're proposing to do. Now, this is the detail which I gave you in March, and perhaps a little bit more information with a few facts and figures about the impact of the changes that we're proposing to make. So, so there is more information available here. I don't intend to go through it line by line because I'm sure you all want to get home tonight, and you have heard it before. So I'll continue. But sorry, the themes are very important in terms of how we deal with social transfers, particularly how we deal with overcrowding, sex overcrowding, how we deal with under-occupation. So, yeah, those are really the important things which are going to make a massive difference in allocation policy. The next slide goes into detail on measures to prevent homelessness and making some changes in the banding system to actually make sure we're kind of able to target people who are most at risk of becoming homeless in the future effectively, and make sure we use our resources as wisely as we can. The next slide is about moves for people needing support, and to repeat it a little bit, but we felt that the 10-year rule was quite restrictive in terms of the people providing support living in the borough for 10 years before they could have the person dependent on their support actually move into the borough. And we thought the cases were so few and far between, it didn't need to be that restrictive. There could still be very serious, genuine cases that we ought to be looking at that didn't, where the relative had less than 10 years. In all honesty, it's very unusual that the relative they wish to join or live near to isn't going to have a long period of residence, but we just felt it was unnecessarily restrictive. People moving, we had to make some changes to the rules because of the restrictions on letting age-restricted homes from housing associations. So we've made those changes in the policy. So this continues on the next slide. So aligning with the housing association policy and simply making sure that we're using that accommodation in the fairest way, maximising those opportunities for what is sometimes difficult to let property. So it'd be silly not to let it to people, you know, if we have takers, even if they don't live in the borough. But we address those situations. But at the end of the day, in fact, the final row here is actually making it clear that the priority is always to people living in the borough. So, I think this is pretty much unchanged in terms of financial eligibility. So we think it's relevant if people are on a big income or have the assets to buy or put a deposit on a place, that they should be doing that rather than being allocated social housing. Anyway, we went through a consultation process over a 6-week period. We had 116 responses, and we had a separate consultation with stakeholders who consist of housing associations, CAB, the county council, local support services, and you can see that it was the proposals were well received, and we got a very positive engagement. But to go in more detail into the responses, and we used, do we use Zen City? Yeah, Zen City. So, I mean, you know, it produces a lot of good information, and, you know, analysing the people who are responding and what their views are. But I'll try and summarise these as quickly as I can, really. I think this first slide is interesting in as much as the vast majority, 61% of respondents are actually homeowners. So people who you would think aren't necessarily going to be touched by the allocation process, but perhaps they have other interests and interests on behalf of their children or whatever. Social housing tenants were the next biggest group, and in fact only 5% are households living with family friends or living in temporary accommodation, who are kind of probably the most immediate users of the allocation system. Okay, and the next slide just shows if people actually have a live application on the housing register, and you can see that 11% or only 11% did, and 83% didn't have an application. Okay, so to work through our proposals, and what I'll do in going through this is, try and give you a quick summary rather than you have to kind of work out what the figures mean. And I'm doing that in terms of looking at the people who strongly or less strongly agree and compare it to the number of people who disagree or disagree strongly. So on the issue of sex overcrowding, what we want to do is to give additional priority where there's 2 children in a household of opposite gender who have to share a room. One of them is 13. And so the responses were actually very positive on that. So 72% of people agree with us or strongly agree with us, as against 15.5% who disagreed. So people very much in favour of that proposal. The next proposal is priority for tenants who are lacking a bed space as opposed to lacking a bedroom. So those people, if they're occupying kind of a 3-bedroom house, one of those rooms is a box room, but it's actually 4 children who are living in that accommodation, didn't get additional priority in the past, but they will in future because they lack a bed space. So simply that will put them into band D. It's not a hugely high priority, but it is at least recognising that there is a degree of overcrowding there. And the agreements there, we had 60% people supporting that, 25 people not supporting it. Then we're proposing to move tenants who are under-occupying by 2 or more rooms, increase their priority from Band B to Band A, because these people are the gold dust in terms of what they give us back. So we want to actually achieve these moves. And again, that was well supported, 76% in favour, compared to only 5% against. Then the next slide is about the idea of offering those people an additional room up to a maximum of a 2-bedroom property. And the problem is that people have to be incentivised to leave their accommodation. Very difficult. They want their grandchildren to come and visit them, all that sort of thing. So it's a big shock to them to have to go from 3-bedroom or even 4-bedroom into 1-bedroom accommodation. Apart from losing half their furniture in the process, but they want to be able to have people stay with them. And so we think it's worth the price of an extra bedroom, because what we get back from them in terms of a 3 or 4-bedroom is, as I say, gold dust. And the public on the whole were very supportive of that, 77% in favour, only 11% against. The next slide is the issue about where people have no right to succeed. And sometimes this is a kind of a curious situation that there is only one right of succession in the public sector. And if you have a husband and wife as joint tenants and one dies, then that is not a succession. So it doesn't count. So if there's when the second party dies, the succession can take place. In a situation where, say, the tenancy was in the husband's name, he dies, the wife succeeds, that is the one succession. If she dies and there's members of the household still in the property, they then have to move. So we're proposing that if that right of succession the one right has been used up, that it's worthwhile, in order to get the release of the accommodation quickly, to agree to accommodate the non-statutory successor to the property. And again, people agree with that, 64%, as against 11% who disagreed. We had a number of kind of open-ended responses, which are interesting, but I think what they show is that there is, generally people actually recording, specifically they record that they were in agreement with the comments. I can answer questions about these, but generally these are all positive and have all been taken account of within the policy changes. But I can answer questions on that if people want to come back later. The next is a proposal to introduce Band C for people living in the private rented sector if they're at threat of eviction, and to do that at an earlier stage rather than risk them being evicted, becoming homeless, have to go into temporary accommodation. So giving them Band C at that stage. And they're 66% agreed, 6% disagreed. We want to introduce priority, increase priority from Band E to Band D for singles and couples living in insecure accommodation. And again, this is favourable in terms of 56% being in favour and only 15% against. Next slide, we wanted to introduce Band E for people to recognise the positive contribution, and this is talking about people in employment in the borough where they're living in the private sector. And again, that was supported 68% for, 10% against. And again, there's a series of open-ended comments issues that we've looked at here about key workers, and in actual fact, key workers normally will get priority under shared ownership schemes. I think the first homes is now dead, by the way. The positive comment is that it will encourage people to remain employed in the borough. Can we buy properties that landlords are selling? Well, the answer is probably not, because we don't have the resources to do that. Can we encourage people to rent privately? Well, indeed we do. And if people are working but on a low income, they should be given priority, which is actually what we're proposing by the banding that we've suggested. Okay, the next group of questions, removing the 10-year rule, as I spoke about at the beginning, and that was well received, 68% for, as against 13% against. People wishing to move, next slide, people wishing to move to the borough over 60, only to be allocated age-restricted accommodation, because this is the accommodation which we can afford to give to non-residents. So we have the supply which should make it possible for us to do that. So that was supported 64% as against 14%. And again, we have some open-ended comments. Supporting the need for families to care for family members who need their support. shouldn't have condition people need to own in the borough. Okay, well, right, that's, I think, obvious. It isn't a condition that people should own the property. People are concerned about it being open to abuse, but I can assure you there is a very thorough assessment of housing need. And people do found out if they're making fraudulent statements. Issues about public transport, and we might share those concerns, but they're outside of the housing ambit. And shouldn't be any age-restricted accommodation. Well, I think there probably should, because it was actually built to support people who need that extra help. So we don't have to agree with all these comments. Okay, so move on to the next group. Increase the age from 50 to 55. Well, the point here is it's about alignment with housing association policies. So there really is no point accepting people for accommodation which we can't nominate them for because the age has increased. And again, that was accepted 59% as against 14% against. Priority for people already living in the borough for adapted or special care accommodation, and which we feel is important, and obviously that was shared by respondents to the survey. 85% supported that statement, 2% against. And then we finish up with some kind of, I think, specific comments. There's broad agreement. People in the borough should get priority, which effectively is what we're doing. House must be open to those in receipt of benefits. It isn't actually relevant if someone is a council taxpayer, although if they are living in accommodation responsible for tax, we expect them to pay it. Making use of surplus accommodation where that exists. Keeping local resources for those connected to the borough, again, that is a priority, and we are taking the opportunity of where there is room to house people into less demand accommodation to help people outside the borough. Okay, and the next section relates to issues about savings and income. So on the income limits, we're proposing the figures on the right as being an income limit above which people should not be eligible for social housing. And there was general agreement with that, although slightly less than in some of the previous categories. So 51% think it's correct, 25% were against it. But I think it is something which has got to be open to review in any case. So all these limits will be subject to annual review. And also we have to remember that there are shared ownership schemes for people who do have the higher income and who don't need to be reliant on social rented accommodation. And then the issue about assets, people coming to us with significant assets, and we put forward a figure of £30,000 above which we think social housing isn't appropriate, again subject to review, and the support there was 59% compared with 24% who were against that idea. And we proposed certain exceptions to the incomes and savings limits, that they shouldn't apply to downsizing tenants, because we want them to move, we want them to downsize, and if we restrict them from moving into into alternative social housing, then we wouldn't gain access to the family home that they don't need and that we desperately do need. And we also felt that it shouldn't apply to members of the armed forces or people retiring from the armed forces who'd received lump sum payments. And we want to retain discretion for people who need specially adapted accommodation or older persons accommodation. And On that point, there was 65% agreement, 13% against. Okay, and then there's a few comments here about what people feel about our suggestions, incentivising those who can afford to move from the social housing sector. Obviously, we'll do that, but we do that in any case because it's a quicker option for people rather than waiting on a long list for social housing. I really don't believe that that this will encourage people to stay unemployed. But we still need some caps. Comments about the saving income limits being too high, and some people think they were too low. Well, as I said, they're not set in stone. We need to keep them under review. Issues about concessions to help key workers. I think we have to look at that. We also have to bear in mind that that they receive priority in any case under key worker schemes. Regular checks for fraud required. Well, absolutely. This is all part of the investigation that we carry out on cases. So, you know, we run a tight ship in terms of the investigations we make. And some agreement on incentives do make massive sense if we are to get people out of accommodation larger than what they need and use it for a family who does desperately need it. And issue about assets being easily available for use, well, you know, I think we have to look at that, but it's covered and we do have some discretion in the scheme. And other comments we have, people should have to live in the area for 10 years. Well, I think that is too restrictive. I don't think we'd be allowed to do it. I think it could well be discriminatory. So there's issues there. But having said that, you know, the vast majority of people that we house do have way in excess of 10 years accommodation. So we're talking about a very small number of people who have less. People talk about transport links, which is outside of our remit. More stock for people with disabilities, and obviously we'll make our contribution in looking at proposals for new developments. Issues for young people to remain local. Well, we've taken young people into account in some of the priorities. Okay, social housing only for those who can afford other options. Okay, well, to an extent that happens. Don't exclude people from housing just because they're trying to work. Well, we don't, so it's not an issue. Up to the thresholds that we're proposing. Review tenancies every 5 years to see if they still need property the same size. Well, the legislation doesn't actually allow us to do that. It's you know, people receive a lifetime tenancy, so we can't go through a review process. Consider volunteering. I think that's difficult as to what level of or how easy it could be to claim volunteering. You know, it would need to be a substantial record of volunteering. So it's quite difficult to think how we could actually apply that in a fair way without offering kind of alternative route, which could be quite suspect in some cases. Encourage new housing. Well, absolutely. We do want to encourage housing. We're working hard to encourage housing, which is affordable and actually more social rented housing. And you know, it's part of my role in terms of housing development to be pushing very hard for that to happen. So you know, absolutely, it's on board, but it doesn't actually affect the allocation rules which we're proposing to change. Okay, so sorry if that was too quick or even too slow, I don't know. I should have timed it.
It was perfect. Thank you very much, Adam.
Over
That
to
was
you.
Really excellent. Thank you very much. Sorry. Sorry. Right, members.
Thank you, Chair. Happy birthday to your wife. Thank you very much for a presentation. For someone who wasn't going to go through all the slides, you did very well. Thank you. No, that was really good. And we're obviously here today to look at this as a housing allocations policy. And I just think that I would also like to say to everyone that I speak to in housing when I'm dealing with sort of residents, thank you, because you're always really helpful. And obviously, we all want to help. We all come from different angles. I think this just highlights, if you look at from when we were looking at moving from Band C to B, and I've had such conversations recently, you know, you've got 56 families who are affected. This is where we have to be focusing the policies on freeing up these properties, because for all the reasons that you covered in your presentation, that just has to be the focus. And because we've got a housing situation similar to the private sector where there is just a lack of housing, and especially on the rental side. And I just think any policy has to focus really on the points about freeing up the larger homes and just making sure that people aren't sort of overstaying too long in sort of properties that are too big. But otherwise, a really comprehensive report and really positive, and just a comment really.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you're right, and that's why we're having the Task and Finish group, which is the objective is to develop suggestions, as you know, to reduce under occupancy in this social housing and try find ways that we can encourage households to downsize to more appropriate sized homes. And that is, just to remind you, is Councillor Maxi Allen is going to be the lead member of that. I think you're down as that. And Councillor Sussman and Councillor Umron's on it. And if any other members want to join that, they're welcome. We did write to all group leaders. Well, you're down on you can decide who's going to be the lead. Yeah. But if any other, we did write to all groups and ask them if they had any other members who want to join this, because it is so important.
You are absolutely right, and unfortunately it slipped my mind at that particular moment, but you are correct.
And it just shows the importance. Can I ask a question about the Zen City consultation? Obviously, it's really important that it's to do with Hertsmere, linked to Hertsmere, but it is on the internet. Do we know, are all the respondents that you've put in your charts live in Hertsmere? Do we know that they've been filtered out so that it's only Hertsmere residents?
It's a tricky question. Oh, okay. I won't pass it to Emily because the answer is no, we don't know. So, following on from that, is that not a very... Because you made a point, and it's very valid, by saying certain things like 73% agree with persons over 60, and that's how we're basing a lot of our changes to see if we agree. But don't we really want to know about Hertsmere residents, because every area is very different, and if these people could be living or know nothing about Hertsmere, but they're getting involved in our consultation about our allocations policy, do you feel that's okay? Well, I really don't think for a minute. I mean, it is possible that there are some people from outside the borough who've decided to comment, but you know, I'm sure that from the way this was advertised, the vast majority of people who responded are going to be people living in the borough, and you wouldn't spend 15 minutes filling the Zen City return unless you had some real interest in matters affecting your own community. So it's a good question you ask, and I'm embarrassed that I haven't got an answer, and we ought to make sure we ask that question on this sort of questionnaire, but I don't see it as being a real problem.
Thank you very much. Councillor Butler.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry?
Sorry,
Councillor
you want me
Ronnie
to wait?
first,
I'll wait, sorry.
And then Councillor Butler, then Councillor Allen.
Thank you for the update. And are there any changes being considered to make the housing allocation policy fairer and more responsive to local needs? Like, how do we make sure people in real need and getting the right people, the more priority basis.
I guess at the end of the day, there's a very comprehensive series of figures that we produce at the end of every year, which identifies the number of people in housing need, the level of their need, their ethnicity, and then we produce information as well on the outcomes, how many of those people have been successful, and how that relates to the size of each of the groups. So we can see how effective we are in reaching the community fairly and ensuring that the property is allocated to people in the greatest need. But I guess sort of wider than that, we need to make sure, we need to review our general publicity to make sure people are, members of the public aren't going to read a 50-page document, so we need to make sure it's summarised with the changes that we've made, so that people fully understand the situation and know how to make an application. And certainly our staff will be doing everything they can to assist people to make sure they understand their position under the policy and ensure they get the treatment that they should be getting under the policy. So there's a lot can happen in, to address that issue.
Thank you. Yeah, going back to what you've already spoken about really in terms of the questionnaire and engagement, 116 people out of a population of how many in Hertsmere? I don't think it's a good number when we're trying to get some information. What do you think you could have done in the housing team there to increase that response rate? Would there have been an idea of maybe going to people who are currently on our waiting list, try to look at the people who are currently on the housing association waiting list to try and get them engaged in this process, to try and outreach to those people that actually these policies will affect directly, looking at the homeless shelters, people like that, to try and engage with them to be involved in getting their members to respond to this. Because ultimately, I would have personally felt that we would have got a better response from those people. 116 people out of a massive population in Hertsmere, I don't think's a great number personally, and I think we should have been looking at other ways to engage with people. I can give you my response here as a councillor. I'm in a very unique situation. But obviously the residents that I work with and deal with, you could say, well, me as a councillor, I could have gone out there and done some work as well, quite right. And you would be right to hold my feet to the fire on that one. But I think we should have been doing a lot more to engage with people to get more responses than the 116. I don't think that's enough, personally, to go on to create a policy that will affect a hell of a lot more people. So I would like to know if there's anything else you could have done to increase that number, or do you think you should go back maybe and see if there's some more we could do? Sorry to be a bit harsh, but I just think we could have done a bit better. Sorry.
Well, I'm told that in terms of various exercises we've carried out through Zen City, this is a good response rate. But I don't think we should sit on our hands on it, and it is disappointing, particularly when you look at the number of potential users and the high percentage of owner-occupiers who've come forward. I think in retrospect, we could probably got better engagement with housing associations, and given that there's 7,500 social housing tenants in the borough, then I think we could have used housing association publicity to actually make a much more visible case to people about where we were thinking of making changes. I should say, in a previous life, I've been through this and advertised changes very widely, and and it can be very disappointing, and you kind of get one man and a dog turn up to a presentation when you've booked a room for 100. So it is difficult to get people actually engaged in the process. But you know, we certainly used several media channels to tell people this was happening. We have tried, but I'm sure we could do better.
Quickly, Mr. Chairman, you know, Sen City, whoever, that's fine, but I think we should be going back to them and saying we would have thought, as a council, I'm having the same dialogue at the moment with the town council where we're trying to get the neighbourhood plan response rates up as well. And to me, that's not enough either when we're in a population of so many in Boreham Wood. So I'm always one for engagement. I think it's really important. But I think we're paying them to carry out a survey for this authority. It doesn't take the rocket scientists to work out that they should have gone to the housing association, our waiting list, people that we've just housed. There's ways and incentives. We should be going back to them, or you guys as the portfolio holders, especially if you're going to ask for more questionnaires, and really think about what you're asking them to do and think outside the box about who you're targeting with these policy changes. Because, as I say, there's a lot of people that this will affect, especially in the ward that I represent in Cowley Hill, with one of the highest turnovers of housing association members. And I appreciate what you've done with the policy. I think it's a good policy deep down. The right boxes are being ticked. You know, there's some other questions that I can ask you outside the room rather than hold you up tonight, because I know you've got to be somewhere, and I probably will. Especially when you've got people responding on one of the things about the response here, introducing Band E property. No, that's the wrong one, sorry. But there's one, I'll bring it up with you later, but there's one here that caught my eye, and I'm thinking, well, the response has gone the way because they're private homeowners. It's not gone the way of a social rented tenant. And I think you've already alluded to the fact that straight away most of the people who responded to this were people who own their own property or are mortgage payers. So I'm like, well, that's going to skew the response that you're getting on some of the questionnaires. So I would go back to Sen City and say, I'm sorry, but I'm not a great fan of their work. I think our officers could have done a better job, personally.
So on that point there, I agree that the numbers are surprisingly small. But you have written on page 101 that you, apart from that consultation, you went to stakeholders. So did you ask them similar questions? And have you got a summary of that? Because you've written that they generated positive engagement, but did you actually ask them details about what they thought of our changes? Because if we actually did go to the stakeholders, Councillor Butler, but we've got no report about what the housing associations have said or what they think, and they are the.
I have more faith in our own officers than going to these companies personally. I think our team here can do a better job. Yeah. I've got a lot more faith in our team at Hertsmere.
So, Councillor, are you getting the results of the stakeholder? Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. In terms of the response from stakeholders, there was a great deal of support for the overall changes. There were some concerns about affordability of accommodation in the private sector, which we obviously know is challenging. People liked, most of the suggestions we were putting forward. Concern about benefit caps. Happy to lift the 10-year restrictions. There really wasn't a lot of negatives here. Concern about the issue of childcare, people getting off benefit, agreement with the thresholds overall, a lot of support for the increase to Band C to Band B with the sex overcrowding issue. There were some issues about people thought the age 13 was too high, and we're suggesting it was it went down to 10 years old if the older child was 10 years old. We did look at that, but our problem is that if had we changed that to a lower age group, it would have simply diluted the effect of the policy, and so irrespective of the age of the child being between 10 and 13. or above, then they would have all got the same treatment, which would have meant that people who are suffering the worst levels of sex overcrowding would just be grouped with people with much lower sex overcrowding. There's some useful things said, but at the end of the day, that the allocation policy can only go so far.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I think you're missing my point. I think the policy you've done is fine. I don't think there's a problem with the policy, what you're trying to achieve. Yeah. I'm saying that we, as an authority, as the council, should have looked outside the box rather than just rely on a private business contractor, whoever, to do our research for us. I think our staff could have done it.
I get that. That's a general point
exactly.
we need to look into, because the council is now relying on that for everything.
Exactly, because look, you guys, I feel sorry for your team more than anyone, because ultimately your hands are tied behind your back. You ain't got housing stock. You know, we've got more than enough people that need homes. We're all aware of that, especially in an area where we live. You know, we're in a very rich, wealthy area to some parts, and a very poor and needy area in others. It's a very mixed group here, isn't it? But completely two ends of the extreme within such a small radius. So, and you're fighting a battle with your hands tied behind your back. I feel so sorry for you, because you just do not have the housing stock. So you've done the best you can with the policy, but I think we could have done better with Sen City and asking them to do better research.
I think that's clear now. Thank you very much, because time is, and I know Councillor Matthews needs to go. We have 3 questions scheduled. Councillor Allen, Clarkson and Sullivan. Do you still, have you, yeah, if you want to, yeah.
On that point, I respectfully disagree. I'm not surprised that the number of responses was of that order. It is quite a niche subject, to be absolutely honest about it. It's not often you see the front page of the Daily Mail devoted to social housing allocation policies. It is quite specialist. I reposted your Hertsmere Facebook post about it to groups, and no one got interested. Had it been about a bin not being collected, there'd have been 700 comments. I'm not surprised. I disagree, Councillor Butler. I think you did what you could, and I'm not sure, had the number of responses been double or treble, that the results would have been materially different. My question is about the policy. Firstly, I would it's worth noting our thanks to you and officers for all the hard work on this. There's a lot of work and a lot of information, and I know it's a subject that you've been interested in for a long time, and before you were a portfolio holder. But my question is, we can see in the headline recommendations that a number of categories are upgraded. How is that balanced? Which ones are downgraded? Which people have their priorities lowered to balance out the system?
Well, it's quite difficult to say, because you know, it is kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul. We've got limited resources, but it's also how we use the resources that we have. And so, you know, I have absolutely no misgivings about the additional priority to under-occupiers, because even though we're giving them a higher priority, they give back something which is more valuable. So although you're right in theory that if there's a winner, there's got to be a loser, you know, it's not that obvious that people are losing priority, because we're getting something back which actually helps more people at the end of the day.
So, to put another way, you're confident that the reprioritising, that it will balance out?
That it will balance out, yeah.
Okay.
Emily, did you want to come in, did you say?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make a point in terms of the consultation, because this is kind of just one part of the process. These changes were made because of what we were seeing kind of on the front line. So kind of Maggie's team will be having these conversations with residents and applicants on a daily basis. So a lot of these changes have been considered based on feedback that sits outside of the consultation. So it's brilliant that the consultation supports the changes that we wanted to make, but there was a huge amount of work that went into each of these changes, and that was very much recognised on the feedback that we were receiving every day from residents and applicants. So I just wanted to provide that reassurance.
Yeah, that's reassuring. Thank you very much.
If we can have that, as a tag on this report when it comes to, that would be great. That would be lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. I'll keep it really brief. It's just on the insecure kind of accommodation bit, just what the definition of that is, because that does seem to be such a difficult area, and it's vague as to how we define it. So it's just actually generally, how do we measure that, and then how do we action it, and can we do any more with our policy to make sure that stuff doesn't happen, so that thus homelessness is avoided? It's a very quick question.
Yeah, so I think the insecurity is in two parts really. It's if there's families without children who are in insecure accommodation, who may not have other housing need, but we're allowing them and they weren't previously able to register on the housing list. We're now saying they should be allowed to register. But it's also the people who are threatened with eviction. So rather than simply giving them priority when they present as a homeless applicant, actually recognising that a process has started, and if we can actually become engaged with the family at an earlier stage, there's more chance of us preventing it or finding alternative accommodation for them, or being able to plan for their homelessness occurring within 2 or 3 months down the road, so that it's not a crisis which involves them going into temporary accommodation. So that's how.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report and the changes. And I know when we've had conversations before, a lot of these changes will make such a huge impact to people, and although they seem very small, all these minor tweaks. So I've got 2 very small questions. When the policy is all implemented with all of these changes, when will the review points be for you to know which bits are really making a difference and utilised and ones that aren't? And then would you make further amendments down the line, or be able to put more resource into, one area if that's identified as a really popular line? And secondly, on this part on preventing homelessness, where it says about introducing Band D priority for those in employment in the borough, making a positive community contribution, can you just define what that means? Is that where they've got strong links with groups or faith centres or volunteering? Because I couldn't see a definition in the policy on what positive community contribution means. Thank you.
That was very quickly. Chair.
Is that another question?
It was just a little bit, and there was a general comment. There's a couple of general comments asking that very same question, so I just have to say that it was in the report.
So after Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Clarkson. Yeah.
I'll take the first part of the question. So as I said in answer to Councillor Ryan's question, we carry out a kind of very thorough review of the outturn figures every financial year, so we can actually see the impact, so what effect it's had on housing people from each of the bands. We look at that very closely, and we make sure that there's at the end of the day, that there is no discrimination taking place by looking at the ethnicity, the ethnic makeup of each of the bands. So that's looked at very thoroughly. But in actual fact, in terms of one of the primary considerations, actually trying to get under-occupiers to release those precious family homes, I think the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating. So, in actual fact, I think, I'd say with under-occupiers, there's actually comparatively few registered for transfers. I can't remember what the figure is, 20 or something overall, but it's not a lot of cases. And, I'm convinced that a lot of people exist out there, and they're quite happy living in the big accommodation that they occupy. So it's actually going beyond just dealing with the express need of the people who are already on the list, but actually getting more people to think about the possibility of moving as being a real solution for them. But yeah, we certainly have we'll have the figures to monitor the effect of these changes.
Does that answer your question about? Okay. Oh, right. Okay, because I thought.
I'm on the second half. Apology, I think maybe that's not clear. I think it is in the policy, but we will double check. It is, if you are in employment, then you are making a positive contribution. So it would be if, and Maggie, please come in here and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we decided once someone's passed a probation period, that would be acceptable, and then if it's over a certain amount of hours per week, 16, I think. So it's more focusing on the employment being a positive contribution as opposed to it being specific employment avenues.
No, I just got excited from his back, but actually Councillor Sullivan's question had been asked and there were general comments about that. In those general comments, not everyone working in the borough makes a positive contribution, but that's clear from your response. Thanks.
I have one question only, and it may not be the right forum, but certain residents need to be in certain areas because of religion or communities or facilities. How is that put into an allocations policy about areas? For example, we can allocate somebody in Welwyn Garden in an area where there's a Jewish community. I've had this to me quite a bit. Because we have specific areas, we need to be within walking distance of a synagogue, we need to have kosher food available. And in Potter's Bar, for example, or areas, there's certain areas where you can't be like that, or the allocations were put. Do we allocate on is religion a basis for that, or is there any specific ways that's put in?
Well, we operate a system called choice-based lettings, so people can bid for any property what they want to, and they can get feedback on where they stood in the queue that bid. But effectively, people will understand, or they have to understand sooner or later, that some areas are much more available, and therefore the speed of housing is much quicker. The person's currency in the queue is their band and their waiting time. So whereas someone could bid for kind of willing to accept the 15th floor in Boreham Wood, and they will have much shorter wait than if they're wanting to, if they're only willing to bid for somewhere in Bushy. But that is their choice. All we can do is say that these are the choices available. We can advise them what we think is the effect of their choices. But it does very often happen that the areas where people want to live are areas where there's very low figures for social housing. So effectively, if you want to only bid for an area where we get 3 vacancies a year, and there's 50 people ahead of you who are all desperate to live in that area, and they're ahead of you because they're in a higher band or they've been waiting longer in the same band, then you're going to be facing I can't do the maths, a 17-year wait. And all we can do is tell people the reality of that system. Yeah, but it's their choice, and they make the choice knowing the implications of that choice.
We need more social housing, don't we?
Across the borough.
Massively. Emily, did you want to add to that? Yes. Sorry.
And it was just a quick correction, apologies. For the employment, I've just looked, a minimum of 18 hours if you're a single person and 24 hours if you're a couple. I just wanted to make sure that was minuted. Thank you.
Members? No. I'd like to thank you, Councillor Matthews, and certainly Emily and Maggie and all the officers in your team for the hard work in undertaking this detailed review. As you said, I'm sure it's hours and hours, and also for this presentation. This is very detailed indeed. Thank you very much. And members, I'm sure, note it, and I hope you'll take into account the comments we've made, and I hope you're not too late for supper. Thank you very much. Members happy to carry on with the next item? Yep. Okay. We're now going to go to item 5, which is the portfolio update, resources, IT and digital transformation, with Councillor Giorgio and supported by Claire and Lee. Thank you very much indeed. Members, this is page 11 of our papers.
Good evening, members of the committee and everybody who's watching online. First of all, I'll be giving the update on our IT and digital transformation item. I'll just move through the presentation. So just a bit of information around our customer experience area. Hertsmere's website was updated in December 2024. We're in the process of updating the staff intranet with a target of August this year. And we're also working on a councillor portal, which is one of the LGA recommendations from the peer review. I've been working with Councillor Shenton, who's just left, and we're hoping to have that ready for September. We might have been able to release that a little bit earlier, but there's a few changes or a few extra features that I'd like to be added, which Councillor Shenton has asked us to include. In terms of digital transformation, there's been obviously an update of the chambers and committee rooms that have been refreshed. We've got new additional mics ordered for the boardroom and committee rooms. We've also recently hosted a Netcall supplier event, which included a presentation on delivering digital solutions for tomorrow's councils, and that was on the 18th of June. We had over 50 attendees from councils across the country attending that, and it was a very well-received presentation. We've also got the external digital display systems, which are currently underway for the civic offices. In terms of IDS, we've got a new apprentice appointed and started in July. We've also had a laptop infrastructure procurement and Microsoft SharePoint, which went to Cabinet this evening and was approved. We're going to full council on the 16th of July. And we also received a cyber report that went to the audit committee on the 30th of June. We're also looking at Teams integration with Michelab phone systems that's currently being trialled. In terms of also in IDS, there's also some work that's been going on in the planning department, and we're looking to introduce Power BI to reporting, which would help kind of making sure those reports are clear and easy to read. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much. Members, any questions on that? I think it was quite clear and straightforward. I think let's move on to the next part. Thank you very much.
You. Do we open up the other sort of the presentation, or is it on the same one? Yeah.
The external digital display systems. I'm not sure everyone is absolutely convinced by this idea. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So in order to be transparent and to make sure that members of the public are aware of some of the things that we're doing in the council, there are plans to have a digital display on the side of the council so that we can show people things that we're up to, upcoming events, some of the things that we're currently planning, whether or not, like this evening, if you have some kind of engagement with the public that you want people to kind of get involved with, you can put that up there. So it's a kind of way that we can make sure that anybody passing by the council offices can see something that we're currently working on and kind of, comment or get involved or just have access to that information.
And can you just remind us how much those external digital display systems are costing us, please?
I don't have the figure to hand, but I believe it was in the report that went to the full council recently.
I think it's tens of thousands of pounds. Councillor Butler? Oh.
I'll be blunt. I think the pushback you'll get for that will not be worth doing it. I would suggest that idea is reconsidered.
I don't disagree. Councillor Butler?
I think, Councillor Allen, I tend to agree with you on that. You might not have agreed with my comments earlier, but I agree with you on that one, definitely. I think you're going to get some pushback as well. And also the fact that why only the civic offices? I mean, do the people of Potters Bar, Bushy, Shenley, do they not want to see what's going on as well? I mean, what are we going to do for them? If we're going to have a big screen here, should they not have one as well? I mean, to me, I think it's a waste of money and a waste of time, sorry.
And today, as part of our task and finish, which we'll be alluding to at the end, we received quite detailed information about the communications, and Hertsmere News is very, very, very well read. It does look pretty poor in this day and age, in the economic situation we are in, to be spending many thousands of pounds on screens for advertising which is dubious, we don't need to do, and for what message we're going to get across, and as Councillor Butler said, only in Boreham Woods. I would urge you to reconsider, and I think maybe that might be a decision of the committee to ask that.
I'll just add that many buildings do have digital displays and use them to advertise. Many private companies would pay and lease digital displays in high streets and places all over the country. So I think it's a worthwhile thing to do to make sure that we have lots of information that's available to people in the borough, and also with local government reorganisation, any new organisation would also be able to make use of those displays well into the future.
I've got one comment to add and I'll move on. That depends. You need to provide proof that our message isn't getting through to the public and that we need this extra, because from what we're led to believe from the communications, we're doing very, very well at getting our message across. But anyway, I'll leave it to members because I think this is a member forum. I see Councillor Sussman, Councillor Clarkson and Councillor Sullivan's hands up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I would really urge you to rethink about the digital notice board outside this building. One reason I agree totally with Councillor Butler that we should be looking maybe at the installation of smaller digital notice boards around other parts of the borough, maybe on, you know, sort of council-owned properties. But the main reason is, and I was just so adamant about this on the night of full council last time, is that if you actually, when you leave here tonight, just look at the angle of where that screen is going to be. And I stood there and I've looked that when people are driving, it's just the wrong angle. You're not driving towards looking at it. You need to turn your head. And just from a practicality, from where it is actually going, it makes no sense. And I think that it will be a distraction and it's going to be dangerous. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea. It's potentially an expensive but good idea in the right place, and that is just not the right place. And I think, please, just take a look at the angles, the trees that hide it, the grass that hides it, and please rethink.
That point is not quite clear.
Can I just come back on that? So, of course, if we did do it somewhere that was more easily visible from the street, I'm sure that might be distracting for drivers as well. So I think it's important that it's not in a place that's going to distract drivers and potentially cause an accident. But I also think that, you know, many people in this borough walk and cycle and things like that. And so there are many people that pass by the council offices or come to the council offices for advice, or perhaps to speak to the NHS or the police or whatever it might be, who will be able to view those screens. So I think it's a good place to be putting them. I take on board what you've mentioned about not having them in other towns and places like that. And I think it would be good on other buildings to have digital display boards. I know, you know, in some places, like I believe there might be one on the theatre in Radlett and places like that. You know, they do get used and they are able to be updated with all kinds of information for events that are going on and things that the council are kind of providing. So I would say it's always good to have them in key locations in all of our towns, so that people can find out about kind of things that are going on in their town as they pass by.
Sorry, I just want to come back on the beginning of your response that obviously you don't want to distract drivers or anything. What's the point of having it if it's can't be seen? It's kind of, you can't put it up there because you don't want it, you choose that place because you don't want it to be seen. It's a fantastic idea, but it needs
people walking, not necessarily driving past. But
okay, all right. But I think you need to rethink that.
Okay, that point is now made. Thank you very much. I think Councillor Clarkson and Councillor Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm going to be another one that says I think you should seriously disagree with the policy. I mean, I'm councillor for Bournemouth Hillside, so I'm thrilled in a way it's in Boreham Wood. But I can't quite understand why we're shoving it on a building that's probably going to be defunct in about 2 years' time. So however much money it would cost in the tens of thousands, you know, I totally agree. You know, the concept of a screen showing information to residents is something that I kind of agree with. But yes, I don't think it should be put on the borough council. You know, there's a roundabout there. It seems totally mad, actually. By the time you've looked at it, it's probably a danger. But more specifically, we talk so much about, you know, local government reorganisation. Why would we be spending so much money on an expensive screen on the very building that probably won't be used in 2 years? Why not find locations so whatever happens with local government reorganisation, the screen can stay in the same place? Why put it on the very building that probably won't be here in a few years?
I don't know if the future council will ever organisation that might look like would choose to get rid of this building or not. That remains to be seen for the future council, but the usage of that screen would obviously be able to be used by any future authority or any future company or whoever it might be that might want to take on this building if it was sold. So whether that was the police taking on a larger share, the NHS or council or a private company, whoever it was, it would be obviously part of the value of this building if they were to have the option of digital screens on the side of the building.
Thank you. Apologies, I was in the bathroom when you started the presentation, so I'll keep my HR questions for a little bit later that I had on the report. The only thing I will say about the screens, and I know when the decision was made in full council, it was quite a year ago. Was it last July? That decision was made, and I think it is okay for us to reassess and say, actually, on balance, we could maybe do a reassessment or rethink or maybe cut that. I think it's okay to make amendments and it not be a negative. We're either doing it or we're not doing it, and I think we can completely tweak things to need at the time, because things do happen. We've got LGR, we've got, there might be a different mindset over, I don't know, light pollution, electricity usage, all of these kind of things, or getting the right value for money. So I don't think it's necessarily a negative to reassess things when they come up a year later, when we've actually got to the point of actually putting them. So I don't think it's always a pro or a con. And I think, yeah, as a portfolio holder, alongside with Lee, you have an amazing amount that can be done within this portfolio that can, really innovate the way that we work, and how that comes back to residents. So I'm really interested in how those kind of, I know we've spoken before about those AI tools for planning and bits and pieces, or how residents can communicate with us, and I know there's lots of exciting bits happening with the website. So I know as members we can really show that to residents when those updates come through, saying use this new facility on our website, or through our call centres, or through our AI engines. So please use members and briefings for us to be able to understand it, use it, and then we can get that out there to our residents as well. Thank you.
I'll just add that obviously just before I spoke there was a complaint around the lack of engagement with some of our Zen City tools and things like that. So I don't think we are necessarily doing enough to engage with residents, and I think it's always important to do more. I will also add that, at that full council meeting as well, when we said that we would use these large screens in here as well, certain members spoke out against that because they said also that was a waste of money. But I think we can all see that it's added to the ability for people to see, rather than the very poor picture that we had from a projector in here previously and broken screens on the side. So I appreciate that members are sometimes concerned or worried about the spend, but I also think that we have to keep trying new things, and we have to keep improving as a borough, regardless of what might happen with any future council, and to make sure that we're trying new ways of engaging with residents, so that we can really make sure that we're getting our messages through, whatever they might be and whatever information it is that we're trying to communicate with our residents. Thank you.
Can I just ask one final question about the bot, the planning? It started on the planning. Has that been rolled out yet? Because I can't actually find it on when I go in. The bot doesn't seem to appear on my iPad. Has it been rolled out to every department, to every item now?
It hasn't been rolled out to every department yet. We've got a meeting scheduled with the supplier in 2 weeks' time, I think, to look at how we can roll it out further for waste inquiries or for more general inquiries. So the facility is there, and we are looking to extend it beyond the planning page.
So it has worked well in planning, because we were going to get a report, because it's been quite a long time now from plan when it came in.
Yeah.
It was meant to come, we were not meant to get a report within 6, it was a trial, wasn't it, in planning?
Yeah, I can check that for you, what the plan was.
Because this is a very good idea. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Only because I have a bit of experience in kind of social media and putting stuff on screens. You do have to, it needs to be big enough, and I forget the dimensions, but as we know, if it's not big enough, actually the whole thing becomes pointless, because the more info you want to put on it, let's say you put this survey, complete this, to put a website address on there, or even a QR code, it needs to be big. So now I'm arguing for a bigger screen. But, but my point stands. Actually, you'll be spending this money. If the thing's not big enough, as it were, no one's going to be able to see it anyway, or read it for long enough. And if they're driving, they won't be able to take the information down, or they've got to get so close to the Borough Council building, which in effect is on a roundabout. It's not part of the main road. It is a bit awkward. So you may be quite limited about what messaging you put up there, other than a few big words and a picture.
And Councillor Sullivan.
And I think it is worth noting, and this is not an officer's fault that this happened, but when this went to full council last year, it was put in as an addition of funding works that had to be voted for, because it was with mandatory items such as fire safety, regulatory things that needed to be done in the civic centre. So there wasn't the mechanism for critique or scrutiny of that exact item, because it didn't come as a separate recommended item. So I know at the time that was voted, but that, you know, that's why we're saying now, is there mechanisms to be able to review usage when it's been a year later? Not that, you know, it's about, you know, pros and cons and balance, but that at that time it was in something that was a mandatory spend that had to be done on that full council agenda.
Yes, so I would welcome that, you know, we review its usage once it's been installed. I understand it's been ordered and it's probably due to be installed in about 2 weeks' time. Also on the size, I understand it's 78 inches, so I think that's quite a large TV size, quite a large screen. Don't imagine any of us have got anyone that big in our homes, but it's quite a large screen, and so things like QR codes and things like that, you should be able to face your phone up at it and scan a QR code and things like that in order to kind of like go to a website or wherever it might be.
Okay, I think we're nearly exhausting it. I think you get the general view, and I think Councillor Sullivan made an excellent point. It was never able to come under any member's scrutiny. And I'm not sure it should, because it depends how detailed we are able to go into, but it was bulked with other items on the day, and we did want to speak out against it, but we could never do that because the recommendations, it was joined in with other essential items. And I think that point is important. Councillor Sussman.
Very quick question, as we're talking about it. Can we please get that clock working up there? Because I don't think it's ever worked. And actually, when we sit on this side of the chamber, we do need to just keep an eye on things. So that I'd really appreciate if that could please be working. Thank you.
Yeah, and on that point, we're already 2 hours into our meeting, so we need to be briefer now. It's 5 to 9, so we're 2 hours in after a long day. So, yeah, I'm sure that point will be noted. And can we now move on to the next part of the presentation? Thank you very much.
Thank you, members. So the next part of the presentation is on human resources. You've all had this circulated, so you should be able to read it. First of all, there's just a quick slide about the makeup of the HR team. As you may have been aware, there was a role sitting in between Claire and the team, which we removed recently because it frankly wasn't needed. We didn't need an extra level of management in between. But as you can see, it's quite a lean team in terms of the numbers. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So some key statistics and performance indicators as at the end of Q4 24 to 25. The total employee headcount is 324 with a full-time equivalent of 307. The turnover rate is 15.9% with a short-term sickness absence per full-time employee in a rolling 12-month period of 3.08 days. Some key workforce challenges around areas like workforce capacity, recruitment and retention. Obviously, local government reorganisation is having an impact on that. Pay and reward challenges, especially with our proximity to London, which is always an issue in this area. Also, we have an ageing workforce, and so have to work on our succession planning. And one of the items that came to Cabinet earlier this evening is it going in some way to help address that. We also have a skills shortage in certain key areas, such as HGV drivers, in planning and asset management. And there's also an issue around employee well-being, so employee workloads and stress, obviously, as a result in some ways of, maybe being in a department that may be under-resourced in terms of people. That might make it more difficult for the existing employees to make up or to pull up the slack. In terms of the staff survey that we had feedback for March 2025, some of the areas of strength that we had were 71% of people would recommend Hertsmere as a great place to work, which is an improvement from 63% in 2024. 86% understand how their work contributes to organisational goals. And recognition from managers has increased to 76%, which is up from 59% in 2024. 89% feel safe at work, 86% say that their environment supports effective working, and 83% are satisfied with the benefits package, which is up from 75%. There's also an increase in people reporting good work-life balance, but there has been a small decrease in people saying that they feel able to be themselves at work. And yeah, the numbers are up on there for you to see. There's other areas that we need to improve on that we feel. So 40% feel managers address poor performance effectively. 40% feel there is a lack of career progression and opportunities. And some people have commented to say that they feel that there should be an improvement in the reception area security. There's also some questions around clarity on pay progression, benchmarking and performance. 55% reported feeling unwell in the past year due to stress at work. And I think this one's particularly worrying is 12% felt that they had been discriminated against, harassed or bullied at work in the past 12 months, although I will add that this is the same percentage that reported it in 2024, so there hasn't been a change in that percentage. 59% of those who reported discrimination or bullying were satisfied with the process, however. I think I'll move on because I think that's enough of some of those stats there. You've all had that. Some of the key achievements for the HR team are that they've produced a new people strategy. They launched a new wellbeing initiative, including on-site B12 injections and a monthly HR and wellbeing newsletter. Revised the hybrid working policy, trained managers and facilitated meetings to communicate with staff. Introduced new mandatory training policy for office-based staff. Upgraded the learning management system, provided managers with dashboard access. Conducted the annual staff satisfaction and engagement survey. Consulted on and implemented the annual pay award. Implemented the senior leadership team restructure, so those were both in April 2025, and successfully recruited to the post of Director of Place Transformation, which some of our councillors here sat on that recruitment process. We also implemented a new rewards and recognition platform, introducing salary sacrifice programs for home electronics and gym memberships. We published the annual gender pay gap report and introduced a new online suggestion box, also enabling anonymous feedback. Our current plan priorities are to revise the pay progression policy, implement a leadership development programme, introduce an electric vehicle salary sacrifice scheme, revisit the recognition and awards policy, and introduce a new mandatory training policy for site-based staff, expand the use of clear review performance management system, and introduce apprenticeship training in AI, data and project management. Thank you, everyone. Is there any further questions? Councillor? Yeah.
I think there'll be quite a few questions I can see already, and I've got lots. So I think Councillor Butler, Clarkson, Sullivan and Sussman, please.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Yeah, the improvements in reception area security required. We did a policy review on that some years ago because I was actually involved in that, where we added additional security around the building. So, for instance, the doors here, for some reason, I still don't understand why this one isn't a locking mechanism, because actually in the old days you just run across the chamber and that's it. So, you know, unless you get into the group rooms or the mayor's office or anything, you're kind of scuppered if someone's coming after you type thing. But anyway, I suppose we've got the police on this floor now, so maybe that makes people feel safer. But the security downstairs, I would go back and look at the review that we did, because that was part of that review, especially for safe areas, safe zones for staff who feel threatened and stuff like that. It was part of that review, and I don't know if any of those were actually implemented. I know the doors up here were implemented, so it'd be worth having a look at that review. I can't remember the year though, I can probably dig it out. But
yeah, I totally agree. I think our safety of our staff is our number one priority and should be. I think that the issue around, or you mentioned about the doors here, it might be because they're obviously fire exits, so it might be difficult to implement that. But it might be a way that you could do it whereby if the fire alarm is you know, on, then you can then get through, but then kind of defeats the object that somebody could potentially pull the fire alarm in order to get access to those rooms. I think that, yeah, it would be better if we were able to block access or have some kind of, you have to swipe your pass to get past the main security desk. But the issue was around the use of the NHS building around the back and the fact that members of the public would need access to that site, which is why that change wasn't implemented.
No, if you look at the policy, it's not around that. It's about a safe zone. So if members of staff felt threatened or anything, they could have a room to go and lock themselves in, basically. If you look at the policy, the actual document, I'd have to dig it out for you, but we did a review on this, and I was heavily involved in that review. And as I say, about this security door, that's a completely different matter, to be perfectly honest with you. The rest of it was implemented, but that was one specific thing, because if a member of staff has a knife or something like that pulled, but they've got a safe zone or somewhere to be able to go to, and they feel that they can just scarper into that room, that was part of the thing. Now, obviously, I appreciate there's only so many rooms downstairs in the landing there, and I hear what you're saying, but have a look at it, because it was in there. I was heavily involved in that policy. It was nothing about a swipe card to get past that reception area. It was about actually having somewhere for those members of staff to go into if they're feeling unsecure and, you know, safe.
If I could just add, there has been a design created for a redesign for the customer service area to ensure that members of the public would have to be allowed through into the to the sort of the seating area where they're currently able to just walk through, because potentially they could tailgate and come up into the council offices potentially. Also within that design, it was an alternative exit route for council staff as well, so that they don't necessarily have to exit through the front door. So that design has been created. I'm actually not sure where we're up to with that, and it will, I guess, depend on cost and the amount of time this building potentially has left. But that is something that is currently being looked at.
I'd rather that be implemented quicker than the screen.
So would I. I mean, it's a very good point, and on that, we had an incident here a few weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, when there was members left in the building and the alarm went off because they were locked in. And it made me think we do not know a list of who's in the building at all. And I think that's against fire regulations for most public buildings. You're meant to know who's in and about. If there was a fire, who would know to go in? So there should be a swipe in and swipe out, so they can just quickly generate a list, so you know how many are outside, and then you know if people are left in, because that changes the way fire brigades respond.
Yes, we do have the ability via Chubb and our swipe cards, so we can track these. So wherever we swipe within the building, that can be tracked, so you can see that. And the civic office keepers have access to that system, so they're able to create reports on who is in and out of the building, depending on the swipe access. Though
So I think that should be looked at. So that at the end of the day, they just need to look. No one's in, and then they can lock up, because that was quite a scary. It could have been a scary event.
Yes, exactly. So if the swipe access was actually available to sort of come through where reception is to get into the main building, then that would be helpful.
So could we look at that, please? Thank you very much.
Actually, thank you, Chair. No, that conversation reminded me of being literally locked in this building with Councillor Morris and, Councillor, which was something I'll never quite forget. But actually, reflecting on it now, it would have been very dangerous, but we had fun with it, as much as we could do. Look, I just was looking at those statistics, interesting, isn't it? Areas of strength, and I know. Well, firstly, it's great that people are better, feel well informed, up kind of 11%, but that is the same percent decrease in people being able to be themselves at work, and I wonder what that means. Obviously you have responsibility portfolio holder for that. It says equality and diversity, but perhaps it also has responsibility for being yourself at work. And I was wondering what your reflections were on that, because if we looked at the total number, was it 324 people? I don't know how many filled in the survey. 84% would say that was 272. So that's still 35 people that don't feel they can be themselves working at Hertsmere Borough Council. Wondering what your views are on that and why that decreased in a year.
I agree that's disappointing, and I would like to see that more people feel that they can be themselves at work. It may be because of some of those factors that you mentioned. It may also be that some people feel that they just put on somebody else when they're at work, that they try and become, their more professional self, or they maybe speak in a slightly different way and things like that. I'd like people to feel comfortable in their own skin and to not have to do that every day, because doing so can be very tiring and very bad for your mental health, and if you're doing that every day and trying to put on a face of someone who you're not. But I appreciate that there may be reasons why people are choosing to do that.
If I can just add, I think where that was positioned within the survey, I feel that what they were getting at from that was about potentially culture and sexuality, for example. I think that's where we're coming from here. And what I can say, what we've done so far, is we have undertaken an extensive equality and diversity training programme for all staff. That took place in September last year. It was a really well-received programme where all members of staff in the civic offices attended. It was an acting-based training, so it was a very interactive equality and diversity programme. Obviously, there's always more that you can do. We just have to continue raising awareness about inclusivity and continuing to repeat training where we can.
No, it is linked to that, because it's not that I'm against equality and diversity. I mean, goodness me, I tick well, certainly one box. But for me, I wonder if it was all that, or whether there may be people that actually they can't be themselves, maybe they're not disagree with all the diversity. Maybe they can't actually say that either. I just was wondering if you could dig deeper, because actually sometimes it's the other side of the coin. Some people can't be themselves because they are faced with a lot of this diversity and inclusivity, and I'm taking a very objective view on it. It may also be that they can't quite be themselves because they don't quite necessarily agree, but they don't fit in because they haven't got an inclusivity problem, and sometimes it can be an over-inclusivity issue as well as too little.
This year we did add in a lot of qualitative questions into the survey, so it wasn't just sort of multiple choice sort of answers, and people could give qualitative answers, but that isn't one that we sort of probed, so I can't be certain as to what people meant by that. I still think it's a strong result, so I don't think it's something that we should necessarily focus on as a problem.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I know just the pure amount of work that has gone into HR over the last few years, and how we've seen all of this come to fruition, and hopefully we'll start seeing those positive results through the surveys. Now we've got the hybrid working, the wellbeing initiatives. I know the B12 and stuff will be really popular, and all of these walking Wednesdays, new training, all of these kind of things that we have. My question was around, I really like the introduction of the new online suggestion box, because that might alleviate some of those points from the surveys where people feel that they couldn't quite articulate what they wanted to say for fear of their manager or anyone else in their team getting back to them. But it's a way of making managers, line managers, aware of the way that their staff may be feeling without having to be challenge anyone on it. And I think just having that awareness, I think, is really, really positive. The only thing I wanted to pick up on is that there's still these few kind of sticking points around pay, and I know a lot of work's been done, but is there any specific area where you think you're going to explore to do more on, but also around the data around those who feel stress at work, and whether, I know we've had this conversation before, is it people who feel stressed because of their work, or they're generally stressed in their life and their environments, and that's coming out into their workplace? But what more can we do through that, because they're quite hard to quantify, even with all the new policies that have come through. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. I totally agree. Having an online way that you can give us suggestions or feedback around something you think is not quite right, or something that we can improve, is a really invaluable way of us getting information from members of staff about things they might not necessarily feel comfortable with raising with their manager, or raising with us on their own for fear of some kind of recrimination or whatever it might be. But having a way that they can give us that information anonymously is really important, that we can kind of then take or take some action away from there. And I assume that, I hope that Claire will be reading those very carefully and seeing if there's, there might be some things which are on there which may be a grievance of one individual, but there may be some things on there that we can take away and we can act and improve upon. And I hope any members of staff who watch this as well, say that we will read those, and we will try and make sure that we try and take some action on some of those. Around pay, I think we're still in some ways reeling from the kind of cost of living crisis. We hit like a 10% inflation rate at one point, and even though inflation came back down to around the 2% mark, we've kind of gone back up around the 3.5% mark at the moment. And with our annual pay increases at 3% a year, it means that once again in the public sector, you're just behind now that kind of that increase in inflation, which makes it more difficult for people to make ends meet, which means they're then probably more likely to then think, well, is it time to then maybe make a jump to another organisation, whether that be in the private or public sector? So it's something we obviously keenly have to keep an eye on, and make sure that if that rate of turnover increases, that we obviously have to take a look at that and see what else we can do. But we're very much constrained by our finances to be able to give those pay increases even as much as we'd like to. But hopefully some of the other things that we can do in order to help people make their pay go a bit further. So I mentioned on here things like salary sacrifice schemes and things like that mean that you can sometimes pay for certain things out of pre-tax income, and that helps to reduce the liability you're paying, and it helps you to then make ends meet in that way. I'll just hand over to Claire to maybe talk a bit about stress at work. Thank you.
Just firstly to add a little bit on pay as well. Hertsmere is obviously, our pay is locally negotiated, and our pay award for April this year was 3%. The NJC national employers have recommended a percentage increase for 3.2% for NJC staff, and that has been rejected by the unions. And they are suggesting a rejection by their members. So really that's just a bit of information. We don't yet know what the outcome will be, and obviously all those NJC staff have still not received their award, and sometimes don't until sometimes even December time, whereas our staff get their award in April every year. So that's one thing to mention. The other thing to mention is that when staff have commented on pay, often it's about pay progression, and it's how our pay progression policy works. And that's something that I want to bring back to the Personnel Committee as a revision in September, because at the moment our standard pay progression is that an employee may be brought in between the minimum and the market-related point of our grade, and they need to wait then 3 years before they move to the market-related point. That was picked up in the ILGA review on pay, which we commissioned last year, as being way too long to wait. I think that's obvious, but we need to make sure that policy is changed, and people don't need to wait that long for a move to the market-related point, which is the point at which they should be fully competent in their role. And I'm sure most people do obtain full competency before 3 years in post. So those are the 2 points on pay. And the question relating to stress. So that's come out both in the Health and Wellbeing Survey that we issued in October last year, and also the Self-Satisfaction Survey this year. And both relate to work-related stress in relation to workload, pressure of work. And that's something that we need to try and find a solution to. And one of the action points in the people strategy is for managers to look at processes within their team, potentially look at the way AI can help support teams to reduce workload. And we're also looking to introduce potentially apprenticeships in AI and data analysis, which could potentially then reduce unnecessary workload, which could then release some sort of stress and pressure, workload pressure for staff.
Let's go back to the turnover rate, because I'm slightly sceptical of staff surveys, to be honest. I think the real metric is the turnover rate. That's what tells you most. Forgive me if this is already understood by others, but I am still quite hazy about the final outcome of hybrid working balance, which is a source of some contention, as I understand it. But I've lost track of what the outcome was. Could you fill us in on that?
Yes, so the 2 days in the office was what we had. There was something that came to the council that wanted to up that for managers over a certain job grade, but we said that we wanted to maintain that 2 days in the office because we felt it allowed people to have a good work-life balance, but also to...
You mean 3 in the office?
Sorry, 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, sorry. The other way around. Yeah. So, and so it was 3 days in the office and 2 days at home previously, and we've made it now 2 days in the office and 3 days at home, which I think gives a better work-life balance. But I also think it's important for people who may be in roles that they could kind of come in, have their meetings, gather work and gather information that they need, and then go home and get a bit of time where they can concentrate on that work without having external kind of people coming and asking for other things or whatever it might be. But I do think that that's probably helping a little bit with well-being. But there are also some teams that obviously can't do that and have to come to the office every day because of the nature of their work. And there are some teams obviously who work in the field who obviously have to be there in person. They can't obviously work from home.
I was under the impression that some officers wanted 4-1. Has that gone out the window then, is it?
Which way around? Do you mean 4 in the office and 4 at home?
Yes.
1 at home, or
yes,
or the other way around?
4 in the office, 1 at home. That was that
it's
idea
not
was
something
defeated.
We're currently looking at, and again, it's something that helps us in the public sector be able to differentiate ourselves. Is that if we're not able to offer higher levels of pay, but we are able to be more flexible in terms of work from home, that means that for some people that's important for them. I will caveat that with, if you're a very senior leader, there is an expectation that you're probably in the office most days, if not every day. But that's because of the nature of the role and the remuneration you receive, which means that you really should be considering that. But if you're somebody in our office who's on potentially a lower pay grade, if you're able to do your work and you're doing it to a good standard, where that work takes place isn't really a concern for us, as long as it's somewhere reasonably suitable for you to be working.
Thank you. Claire?
Just to add that it is service dependent as well. So whilst the policy says that you can work 3 days a week from home, that is very much dependent on the service that you work in and the work that you do. The policy was changed and implemented in June, and that allowed us time to arrange meetings with all of the service groups so that managers could set expectations for their team. So, for example, my team, it's a small team. Also, we need to be here more often because the staff need HR in the building often. And so when we have that meeting within my team, we understood that there might be the requirement for us to work 3 days in the office, 4 days in the office, potentially some weeks, and certainly for service heads and senior leaders, the likelihood is that the role that they do, the meetings that they have, will mean that they're in the office more often. So really, it's a minimum requirement, but it's really has to be service-led.
I am slightly concerned, but you will tell me if it's the normal sort of levels. When I'm reading the staff survey feedback, I'm seeing that over 10% do not feel safe at work. That seems to me very high. How is that benchmarked? And is that linked to when it says 12% felt they've been discriminated against, harassed or bullied? Are they the same in the 8 to 9% category the 11% who don't feel safe at work?
In terms of safety at work, it was in relation to safety within their working environment. So some of the comments that we had were around the reception area at the civic officers. So that was where it was mainly coming from in terms of safety. And when we say 89% feel safe at work, there were degrees of feeling not safe. So it wasn't just I feel totally unsafe. So we were just amalgamating those figures really. So I don't think that it needs to be something to focus on apart from the fact that we need to look at the perception. Yeah.
It is also important, isn't it? That's very, very clear. And I saw Councillor Sussman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed reading this report. I'm really interested in things like this. I did have about 12 points, and they've mostly been covered, so I'm down to 3, you'll be pleased to hear. I think given that 40% feel there's a lack of career progression opportunities, I think the next couple of years have to be managed very carefully, and I'm sure that you're aware of that. So no real question, just more an observation. But my final 2 points actually come from the same thing, which is staff turnover. So if we come out of this presentation and look at the graph on 5.2, the turnover by council, we sit 12 out of 13 councils as the highest one for turnover. And I note from the survey that 22% plan to leave in the next year.
Natalie, I think the table you referred to,
Yeah.
just remind me if I'm right, is the next presentation. That's agenda item 6.
Oh, okay.
We're going to be discussing staff retention and turnover in the next item.
Oh, okay.
So,
no, it's fine. Okay, I am. No, I've really read this thoroughly, right? So 22% plan to leave in the next year, mainly due to pay, which, just been one step ahead, is higher than where we sat 12 out of 13, which you'll see soon. How are we going to prepare for that potentially we're going to have a 22% turnover, which is higher than the 15.9 or something that we're at this year? And also, with everything being nationally challenging, how are we at Hertsmere going to up the ante to make ourselves stand out, to be an employer that people want to work for? Thank you.
So I think having now a people strategy in place will really help. We have an action plan for 25-26, which sets out a variety of different actions to help support recruitment, retention, engagement, well-being, leadership. So all of those things I think will help to support staff. Obviously, I'll talk a bit more about it in the next presentation in terms of what staff have told us that they are looking for in an employer, what will make them stay, and those are the things that we ought to be concentrating on. Pay being the top one, and as I said, we need to get that pay progression policy changed. It's not fit for purpose, so that's the essential really, because staff have been asking for that for a long time, and we just need to now push it through.
Do members have any item anymore? That's great. So that is item.
I just want one last thing. What do you mean the introduction of the electric vehicle salary sacrifice scheme? I just flesh that out a little bit because we've only got so many charging points.
So it's around allowing staff to pay for leasing an electric vehicle from their pre-tax income. So it's one of the ways in which you can help staff to make their salary go a bit further. If you're driving a car and it's perfectly fine, you're not looking to replace it, then fine, continue doing that. If your car's given up the ghost and you're looking now to get a new car and you're looking at some of the options, one of those would be to lease a vehicle. Very often, some of the lease agreements include all kinds of things. So they include sort of the repairs on the vehicle, or they might include tyres. Some even do, and all these kinds of things. So we're currently looking at providers of which one to pick in terms of that, and which one offers the best value. Some might offer more of these add-ons, but then they may potentially charge you more for that. And others might offer less, but then or may have a more limited number of cars, but then they might have more reasonable pricing. So it's a case of looking at those options. But in doing that, it means that people can potentially get a more efficient car or an electric car, which then allows them to then make savings over a longer term as well.
And it's just a shame that a lot of these are not available to councillors, because I think some of these should be available, but nothing is to us, which is unfair, I think, because we do pay tax on our income. It is, for some people, it is a main job.
I might also just add that for like senior leaders as well, some of them get a car allowance, and so it might be for some of them they actually choose to do this instead, because it may be that they they might be able to get a really quite good spec car and they could maybe change it every 2 or 3 years quite easily under that scheme, because you're leasing it and you just give it back after wherever the lease ends. So it's also might be that there might be some senior leaders who choose to use this scheme instead. Yep.
Right, thank you very much. That's item 5. I won't thank you because we're going to move straight on into item 6, which is on page 27 of our papers. Natalie, do you have any questions? Oh, no, we'll start the presentation.
Thank you. So the purpose of the report is to provide an analysis of the staff retention and turnover trends for 24-25. The committee asked for a sort of deep dive information on this area. It also looks at the key factors influencing why staff decide to leave or decide to stay, and also looks at what we're doing to mitigate any of those risks. So nationally, recruitment and retention is considered to be one of the biggest challenges facing local government, so we're not alone in those recruitment pressures. So according to research, the national themes in terms of capacity issues, recruitment and retention issues are similar to what we see at Hertsmere. So pay constraints, working conditions, so post-pandemic there are staff expectations have changed in terms of hybrid working. Budget and staffing reductions has also had a massive impact. Also sector image as well. Local government is increasingly seen as a less attractive career path. And also the local government pension scheme is no longer something that we can actually use as a competitive advantage because of the housing, the rise of cost of living. People are looking for money now, not necessarily money later. There's also demographic shifts in terms of an ageing workforce nationally, and Hertsmere also is seeing that too. So what have we been doing to monitor capacity pressures at Hertsmere? We report on recruitment and retention outcomes on a quarterly basis to the Personnel Committee and to the Senior Leadership Team. We also undertake exit interviews with staff who are leaving to identify reasons for leaving. We've been doing staff satisfaction and engagement surveys. We also use benchmarking tools to be able to benchmark against pay and also benefits. And also we monitor agency usage as well, reporting that to senior leaders on a monthly basis. So section 4 starts with the analysis of turnover. So during the financial year 24-25, there has been a slight improvement in turnover from 17.3% at the end of 23-24 to 15.9% at the end of financial year 24-25. So we have seen an improvement. The turnover rate we break down into unplanned turnover, which is the voluntary resignations. There has been some improvement in workforce stability in that case. We also break that down into retirement turnover. There has been a gradual increase over the year, and we're seeing an increase in retirement turnover since COVID. Really, that's been on the up, and that's been reported throughout Hertfordshire as well from my colleagues in other councils. In terms of planned turnover, so that means sort of mutually agreed exits or end of fixed term contracts, that has remained fairly steady. So the total turnover has fluctuated slightly, but overall declined. So it was at the beginning of the financial year, it was 17.6%, and then we ended with 15.9%. So we can see how the turnover is broken down into service group, and you can see, if I just pick out the top three, turnover has been most prolific in asset management and engineering, partnerships and community engagement, and finance and business services. So in asset management, we did have a period of very high turnover. It's a very difficult area to recruit into because we're also competing with the private sector. We've undertaken a comprehensive programme of improvement measures, and this has included obviously appointing a new head of service to the team. We commissioned an independent review of the engineering services from ILGA. We redesigned and reevaluated the majority of the roles, which allowed us to provide an enhanced pay package. We did a detailed pay benchmarking exercise, introduced enhanced pay progression for the surveyors within the team, and also a targeted retention payment scheme as well for the surveyors in that team too. And that has really made a massive difference, and we've been able to recruit to those roles permanently for the first time in many years, and that's also allowed us to reduce our agency usage in that area as well. So in terms of the Finance and Business Services unit, a couple of things have impacted on turnover there. One being a minor restructuring in IDS, and also 50% of the leavers in that area have left through voluntary resignation, and most of those in IDS. And we're seeing a trend really of losing those people that come into the lower level junior service desk roles. They come here to gain experience and then move on to more higher paid roles, usually in London. That's a trend throughout the sector in any case. But to address that issue and that trend, we do have apprenticeship opportunities in the IDS team. We're actually recruiting to one right now. They're due to start in July. So that's a useful way to sort of develop people and sort of keep that flow of new staff coming into the team. The other sort of top 3 areas of turnover was partnership and community engagement. It appears worse than it is really, because that's a very small team. But in particular, we have had a lot of turnover within the communications team. And they are under a lot of pressure in terms of the extra demands on their services. So it is something that we really need to be mindful of, that's a real focus area for us to ensure that the current staff are not under undue pressure because of the shortages we have at the moment in that team. I won't cover the other areas of turnover specifically, because I think the top 3 are the most important to cover. In terms of leavers' data and reasons for departure, in section 4.9 we can see the reasons for leaving, the main reasons for leaving. The majority of those you can see were voluntary resignations. However, you ought to note that 8 of those were under some form of performance management. So not all of those voluntary resignations were unwanted, shall we say. So there was a total of 49 people that left during that period. Having looked at the leavers equality profile, it's broadly consistent with the overall workforce profile, so we don't consider there to be any problems in terms of that. Moving on to the benchmarking data, I should say that you can now virtually ignore sections 5.1 and 5.2. I have some updated information that I can give you that has recently been provided as a result of the data stream for local government reorganisation. And the updated information also is only for Hertfordshire and is much more relevant to us. So the results indicate that turnover in Hertfordshire authorities ranges from 8.2% to 21.5%. And therefore the average calculated based on the 8 Hertfordshire authorities who've so far provided data is 15.7%. So if you look at our current turnover rate, we are virtually in the middle. So we are not at either of the extreme ends there. So moving on to the analysis of exit interview data. Of the people that left during that period, 10 employees cited work-related reasons, 11 were personal reasons, and 5 were not invited due to the circumstances of their departure. So of the 10 people that did provide work-related reasons for why they left the authority, those were in sort of 3 main areas, and this tends to be the case. So 70% said career progression opportunities was the main reason for leaving, 60% pay dissatisfaction, and 50% flexible working arrangements. But obviously it should be noted that the hybrid working policy was revised in June, so we're yet to see the advantages of changing that policy. So the themes mirror very closely the themes that come out through the staff satisfaction and engagement survey, which you might expect. So whilst 54% of employees expressed a desire to remain with the council for the next 3 years, 22% indicated that they were likely to leave within the next 12 months, which, as Councillor Sussman mentioned, that's quite concerning. And we need to make sure that we are certainly putting in some measures in place, particularly in relation to pay, which was the main reason that people said that they were looking to leave within the next 12 months. So the survey responses identified top 5 factors which would most encourage them to stay, which is what we need to focus on most. So pay and fair compensation, career development and progression, flexibility and work-life balance, positive culture and working environment, and meaningful, enjoyable work. And these have all been taken into consideration when writing the people strategy and the action plan for that strategy as well. So what actions have we taken to reduce staff turnover and improve retention? We've introduced retention payments. I mentioned earlier that we'd introduced retention payments for surveyors in asset management. Retention payments have also been introduced within the planning service as well. And we also provide retention payments for HGV drivers and loaders. And the HGV driver and loader retention payments have been in place for quite some time now, and we have seen a positive result from that. The asset management and planning have only been in place since April, so we're yet to really see how that's going to impact, and we can monitor that. Apprenticeship programs, we're using apprenticeship programs to attract younger staff, particularly in IDS. We're also using them in the planning service. And as you can see from section 8.3, we have consistently exceeded the apprenticeship target of 2.3% of headcount. We don't actually have an official target anymore. It's not a statutory target that we have to meet. But in all of the years that you can see reported, we've always exceeded that target. We also have a number of career development schemes throughout the council, which allows people to start on a grade lower and progress to the higher grade through either work-related training or a qualification. And you can see in 8.4 the various different areas that we have career grade schemes running in. We also have a Grow Your Own HGV driver scheme, which allows us to train our loaders to become drivers, and we've successfully done this for 6 members of staff. The idea is to run this annually, but we have put a halt on that deliberately for this year because of the major changes that are taking place within the waste service this year. That will be reintroduced. Wellbeing initiatives, we continue to prioritise health and wellbeing. We do have a wide range of health and wellbeing initiatives. We now have a new monthly newsletter which promotes all of those. We have weekly webinars, annual health MOTs, annual flu jabs. We have a B12 injections available to staff. Somebody comes in and provides massages. We have a yoga session. So we really do have a wide range of health and wellbeing benefits, and I think that's certainly very much appreciated by staff, and that has been the feedback that we've received when we ran the health and wellbeing survey. As I've mentioned, the hybrid working policy, we know that had been revised, and now that matches the benchmarking that we did of other authorities. So of 27 other authorities that we benchmarked against in the east of England, all but Hertsmere had a policy of 2 days in the office. So we are now in sync, in line with that benchmarking exercise. I mentioned earlier that we did a review of pay through ILGA. That was in 2024, and really we need to just take action on that report now and implement a new pay progression policy, which will go to Personnel Committee in September. We did a culture refresh in 2024 and consulted widely with members and staff on our corporate values, and those values were decided to be respect, integrity, and making a difference. We have also taken part in the Make a Difference recruitment campaign. That's a national campaign. It was trialled in the north, was very successful. It identified the kind of things that people are looking for in terms of local government. It's there to promote local government as a sector and the wide range of opportunities. The reason that it's called Make a Difference is because it was identified that that is what people in local government are looking for most, in that they want to make a difference in the work that they do. So our future plans, I mentioned we have drafted the people strategy, and that was approved at Personnel Committee in May, and we have an action plan to implement as well, and that will be reported on quarterly to the Personnel Committee and also to the senior leadership team. I've already spoken about the pay progression policy review. We're introducing a leadership development programme, which was very pleased to say the finance for that was approved at Cabinet today. So that leadership development programme will be commencing during September, and that really aligns with the fact that staff have reported the need for career development opportunities. So really hoping that that's really going to be an exciting opportunity for staff. Also introducing data, AI and project management apprenticeship opportunities as well for existing staff. In terms of employee recognition, we will be re-promoting our clear review performance management system, revising our employee awards scheme, and also relaunching that scheme and promoting the new benefits recognition platform as well. That brings me to the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Claire. That's really, really interesting. I know I've got a couple of questions, but as always, I'll lead my panel first. Councillor Rani, then Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the update. My question is what specific steps are being taken to retain the experienced staff and ensure that they feel supported and valued within the council?
Sorry, could I ask you to repeat the first part
Yes.
of the question?
What specific steps are being taken to retain the experienced staff and ensure that they feel supported and valued within the council?
To retain our experienced staff.
Yes, so the steps that we're taking to retain experienced staff are there are a number of things really. The pay progression policy is one of those areas that we really need to focus on to retain those experienced staff. Also providing those experienced staff with career development opportunities through the leadership development programme. If we're thinking about people at the sort of the end part of their career, we also offer a flexible retirement opportunity, which means that they can reduce their hours whilst starting to take their pension. It allows them the opportunity to gradually wind down, whilst giving the opportunity to other staff to start taking on more responsibility as well. So that's another area to help to retain those very experienced members of staff.
And do we ask them why they're leaving, and do we use that feedback to improve the things?
Yes, we do. So we undertake exit interviews with all relevant staff when they leave, and that information is used has been used to look at our people strategy to decide what we factor into that people strategy. That information is also reported back to the Personnel Committee and to the senior leadership team on a quarterly basis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. I love the way this report kind of, it does a holistic view of everything. So it's not just turnover rate, but you've got all those reasons in there and what you're doing going forward. So in comparison, we had at Cabinet, we had a report that detailed the £270,000 overspend in asset management, which was mainly due to agency staff and filling those recruitments. And it's, you know, it's a high turnover for that department. And I know lots been put in place to kind of mitigate that for future years. But I think the acknowledgement that we may be fully recruited now, like Councillor Newmark told me, for asset management, or nearly there, and we've got some amazing quality staff, but there could still be that turnover rate. So we still need to be aware of the risks there and actually what we're doing going forward, because if we do lose those staff, we need very specific staff, agency staff, to go in to do those jobs, which are really, really important for us, and that they still have to be paid for by agency. So the fact that we're, you know, recruited now doesn't mean, you know, we've got to make sure we hold on to that, and that we're always conscious that there could be a spend there. So what was my question that I was going to ask around asset management? Yeah, so we've got all of these, you know, we've got all the new design roles, we've got the retention payments, and I know they've only just come in. Have we got any indication from staff whether, you know, how that retention is going to be, or do we still need to recruit into that department? Do we think all of those things are enough to stop that turnover rate of 43%, or is there more that could be done?
So we have been very successful in recruiting into those roles. I think almost all roles are actually being recruited into now in asset management, and that is literally the first time in many, many years. We haven't been able to recruit apart from via agency, just because we're competing with the private sector. It's a really difficult area, and it's a niche area, and skills shortages anyway, so we're fishing in a very small pool. So we're really pleased that the pay benchmarking that we did clearly was right, because we've been able to recruit. So we regraded the roles, we gave an enhanced pay progression, and also the retention payment. So the retention payment is paid in April, and they get that if they stay for the year. So at least we know for the next 2 years, they have that as an incentive to stay for the year, and then they receive their retention payment at the end of the year. So we don't yet know whether those measures will be enough, but they've certainly been enough to recruit to the posts, and you've got that retention payment in place to incentivise them to stay.
Thank you. I've got 2 comments. One is facetious and one is serious. I just like the idea of where I can get a packet of grow your own HGV driver seeds because it seems quite a nice title. But my serious point is item 13.2, which I think is very serious, is the upcoming local government reorganisation. That must have a detrimental effect. Staff must be very worried. We don't even know what's going to be happening, and I know our residents might be worried about what's going to happen with local democracy. What contingencies are we putting into this? Because if I was a member of staff and I was thinking about where my future lies, I would think it may not lie in Hertsmere Borough Council. Everyone's talking about us being devolved, and we're getting asked, who are we going to join with? So what are the contingencies? And that will affect budgets. And have we put in budgetary amounts for agency staff, etc.? Because I think this could have a really serious effect, and also it involves communications as well, because how we communicate to the public, but then the staff hear about it, so how we communicate with staff is so important, because this is it is the most serious threat they've had to their careers, and I think it should be, I presume it's read in the risk register as well, because this is a real risk to us. Thank you.
It's difficult to tell how worried the staff at the lower levels are in terms of local government reorganisation. Certainly in terms of their responses to the staff survey, their main concern and their main reason for wanting to leave within the next year was not job security, it was pay. So it didn't factor in their feedback in the staff survey. And it's not feedback that I'm receiving, and it's not comments that we're receiving in HR that there is a real concern about local government reorganisation. And it's difficult to tell how that will impact our turnover, because certainly some people that have been here a long time maybe will decide it's definitely worth staying because they don't know what the future might hold. Maybe a redundancy, for example. People might not be willing to sort of move if they've been here for a long time. I think most likely the people that are at risk are the people that have been here for a short period of time. And however, another thing that I would say is that we're seeing the trend when we're recruiting to roles that in the past you would have CVs coming through where people would have many years of experience in a role. And you would be surprised if you saw somebody coming through to a role and they'd only had a year's service here and a year's service there. But this is what we're seeing in almost every single application we ever see, is that people jump jobs very quickly nowadays. They don't stick around for long periods of time. So that seems to be a common trend that we're seeing. People don't stay. That's the new generation of workers are much more readily able and willing to move quickly. In terms of budget put aside to consider agency workers, that's not something that we've done at this moment in time.
If I may also just add to that as well, I think I'll say that with government reorganisation, day one is likely to be very much a branding exercise. We may merge with another authority, but it's going to take time for duplicates of different like management groups or different teams, whatever it might be, and some of the savings that may be found to be kind of realised for those for that new organisation. So I think for some of our staff, because we may be in a new organisation in 2 years' time doesn't necessarily mean any changes to their immediate team immediately at that stage. I'll also say that potentially being in a bigger pool of staff can also have its benefits. If you're in a team right now that there's only one manager for that team, but suddenly we merge with 2 or 3 other councils, suddenly there are four managers of that type of team. And it may be that one of those managers leaves and now you've got an opportunity to then go for that advancement that you may have not otherwise had if you were just in Hertsmere. So as much as there are potentially concerns around government reorganisation, I would also say to any staff that there may be some benefits, and you should probably think about that as well, how there may be a way that being in that bigger organisation actually for your career could actually be beneficial.
Is anything more to members to add?
Chair, I wonder if you could indulge me, since we do have Councillor Giorgio here, because there is an arising question that I do have under your portfolio of digital transformation, IT, and that kind of resource. And Chair, apologies. With our webcasting, are we only able to webcast one meeting at a time, do you know? Because I've had just some notifications come through that residents were watching Cabinet and it's switched over to policy review at 7 p.m. So I didn't know if that is something under our technology that we either can't webcast more than one at a time, and should we be able to, or should we align meetings so that we don't have that overlap, so that public have the recording of being able to watch both sets of meetings?
I'll just say if there is a limitation, it would be a limitation with YouTube, as we've moved to using YouTube to live stream our recordings. There's no reason why we couldn't upload our recordings after the fact. It just might not be that one of them would be live, or then one of them might have to not be live at the time. But there is another opportunity that you could just use a second YouTube channel as such. So you could have a second YouTube channel that's for the times when this happens. So you could live stream both at the same time, and then maybe update the original channel with the recording that you've taken. So it might be that just staff haven't realised that might be an option that we could do. But if this hasn't been uploaded, then please, obviously, staff should upload the recording afterwards.
Okay, so just to clarify, we're recording both. They are recorded. You can record 2 at a time, and they'll be uploaded.
I would have to check, because obviously it's happening live right now. But as long as they've been recorded, there's no reason we couldn't upload them thereafter. Yep.
Members, going into tonight's meeting, we believed that we had the capacity to broadcast 2 meetings simultaneously. Clearly something went wrong. There's going to be an inquest with IDS about that. we'll rethink our strategy next time it happens, if it ever happens. But yeah, both meetings will be are recorded and will be made available online to view back later.
That's the assurance we wanted to out. So thank you very much. Can I reiterate what our councillors have said about how important your work is, Claire, and your team's work, and Councillor Giorgio's work? And I want to thank you all for what you're doing to improve the conditions and look into the conditions of staff. It is so important for our staff to feel wanted, to have innovations, to see that we're moving forward, and you certainly are showing that. And thank you for your presentation tonight. Thank you. So members, we're going to now move on to agenda item 10, forward planning programme and committee work. For those of you who were not able to come at the start, we moved two of the items right to the start. So we've already agreed the terms of reference for the task and finish groups and the members, Councillors Allen, Sussman and Amron. And if there's anyone else who wants to join that, we can. You should have dates, Councillor Sussman, for your first meeting. And Councillor Allen, have they been? I thought they have.
This is the HMO,
the housing one.
They're in September. I'll have to check whether we have precise dates.
I know there was a list of dates given out. We'll confirm the dates, but we want that one to be moving on.
I've not seen anything about dates for that one.
Oh, right. Okay. I saw a draft email then. It must have been.
And can you send me the HMO ones, please? Yeah, the HMO ones. Send me those.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. So
the HMO.
So were the terms of reference for the HMO were? I think we had the terms of reference for the housing policy set last time, didn't we? Yeah. Now this is terms of policy. Terms of reference for the HMO. Yeah, I'm just double checking.
Yeah, they've all been agreed. They've all been agreed. Oh yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, you're right. I said the wrong names. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you very much. It is getting late. It's been a really long day. It's been a really long day today. So the forward planning, and if you look at the pages 169 of our documents, I've been given something to say, but I don't think it's correct, because I think this forward plan is correct. The one I've got in my papers is correct. I don't know which ones are. So basically, originally scheduled in the forward plan was tonight to come forward financial strategy to tonight's cabinet and committee, but it actually isn't in the forward plan. That's now moved to the 10th of September for the cabinet, and then the 4th of November it's coming to us. Is that right?
Yes, Chair. Forward plans are published in the middle of each month, the 12th, 13th, or 14th. I forget the exact date. So the version that you have in your bundle is from that date in June. Since then, the financial strategy item has been delayed.
Yeah. Okay. So it is right. The financial strategy is the forward plan is right that we have. So policy review are going to have the financial strategy. We better check the dates, because we've been told something different by finance here in our papers. It says here it's going to come to committee's next meeting on the 4th of November. That isn't right, Alex. So can we just confirm that? It says here it's going to come on the 9th of September. But on our work programme, it's not there. The financial strategy isn't there.
It's on the work programme, because I updated it in light of what I heard from the Assistant Director for Finance.
Right.
It is.
It's going to Cabinet in September. I thought it was coming to us the day before. Does it not have to come to us first?
It first appears at Cabinet where they open the consultation, right. And then our next meeting is this committee's contribution to that consultation.
So that's the change in our work programme. The 4th of November has now got the financial strategy on it. So our next meeting is the 9th of September, on which you've got plans, a portfolio, a cabinet update from Environmental Sustainability, Councillor Richards, and one street scene, Councillor Myers.
And potentially the task and finish group.
Yes.
Comms.
And the task and finish group, we should have the final report from for the comms one, which is exciting.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can we, with portfolio holders coming that day, can we get an update from Councillor Richards? Make sure he brings an update on the rollout of the grey bins, and because I know there's some residents still, the food waste. I still understand that some residents don't actually have this access to this. So yeah, in Shenley. So I'm quite keen to find out the rollout of that, and so make
Oh,
sure it
right.
brings that
They don't
detail.
have access to food waste.
Yes.
Well, the flats element is what's
It's not,
happening
I'm not
second.
talking about flats, I'm talking about homes.
Oh.
So, yeah, I'm keen to find
Okay.
out. So if you can
So
bring
can we
details on
Yeah,
that.
we'll ask,
because
we'll make sure so
that'd
it
be-
doesn't...
So we
that's
can
good.
actually pinpoint and actually scrutinise what's going on there, please.
Councillor Sullivan?
Can we also, I know we've done it before, reiterate to portfolio holders when they update that we do have their presentations. So if we can keep it succinct with those highlights and changes, then we've got more time for scrutiny and discussion.
Can we ask them to reiterate, I do not want them speaking for more than 10 minutes. There's just no need to when we get the papers in advance. Yeah, I think that's very important. Thank you very much for that point. So
I mean,
we're
on
happy...
on that point, the present where they could save time is we don't really need lots of things. We've got this staff and this structure. It's policy that we're scrutinising, isn't it? Not operation. So if they can focus it on the policy decisions and constraints and considerations, that will make it more efficient.
Absolutely right. So I'm sure that Alex will reiterate that to officers and cabinet members. It's really important. Okay, agenda item 11, AOB, none. Agenda item 12, future meeting, 7 o'clock, the 9th of September. Can I just reiterate, please, as well, that we try not to have this sort of clash we had tonight ever again. I just don't think it's acceptable that we have cabinet and policy review. Yeah, we need to look into it, but we'll look at that. And we're finished.